Chapter 1236. Therefore, the saying, "the ignorant are fearless," could be interpreted in another way besides ridicule and derogatory meaning. If Chinyu wasn't fearless, he wouldn't have dared to think about killing a saint twice. Then, there might be another version of the story. It was unknown whether he and Peach Girl could survive, but in terms of brilliance, intensity, and beauty, the fearless version was definitely better. Killing a saint had never been a simple matter. As someone who had already experienced it once, Chinyu still had some say in this aspect. Therefore, when he had this idea, he didn't feel that he could kill the heavens, the earth, and the air in a moment of passion. If he wanted to kill someone, he had to look at the cards in his hand. Of course, the light and darkness integration was the strongest card Chinyu could use now. However, the facts had already proven that this card was just a matter of a punch to those who were hunting down saints. At most, 2 punches would be enough to smash it. Using this card to kill someone was no different from sending himself to death, so he couldn't count on it. Besides this card, was there any other way? Chinyu frowned, thinking that he had great ambitions, but no power to put them into practice. Just as he was smiling bitterly, Peach Girl woke up. There was no communication. He only glanced at Chinyu with an indifferent expression, as if he had already guessed what he was thinking. "You want to kill him?" Chinyu nodded and then smiled bitterly. "There's no other way. The yard master, senior brother, and the others haven't arrived yet. There must be some other problem." Then he pointed outside the cave. "Senior's sister, listen. They're looking for us. Although we're safe for now, it's only a matter of time before they find us. No matter what, we have to be prepared, or we won't be able to do anything when we need to risk our lives." Peach Girl didn't ask any more questions. She patted her glabella, which made Chinyu's heart skip a beat. With a light paw sound, a phantom shook out from her body. Because of the transmission vortex, he couldn't see the shattered phantom clearly, but now he could see it clearly. This phantom was Peach Girl, just like her. At this moment, the phantom looked at Chinyu with an indifferent expression. Even the look in her eyes was exactly the same as hers. Before Chinyu could react, there was another light paw sound, and a second phantom shook out from Peach Girl's body. It was the same as her. Limit. Peach Girl directly closed her eyes and fainted again after spitting out these 2 words. The 2 Peach Maiden phantoms stepped forwards at the same time. Chinyu reached out a hand, and a translucent bead fell into his palm. There were 2 peach blossoms within it that revolved around each other. Looking at the bead in his palm, Chinyu frowned. Just a single shadow had been shattered, and the transformation of Peach Girl had been astonishing. Now that 2 of them had been broken, there was bound to be a problem. He subconsciously gripped the bead and took a deep breath. His face darkened, and his eyes became unprecedentedly cold. Up until now, he could be considered a big shot, but he had fallen to the point where he needed his woman to risk her life. He was such a failure. Well, this was a bit inappropriate, but the general meaning wasn't wrong. It didn't make Chinyu feel any better at all. Fuck him. He had to kill him. In the past, Peach Girl had shattered a phantom to block the Black Shadow's attack, helping the 2 of them escape successfully. Now that the 2 shadows had condensed this bead, its power would naturally be even greater. If he added in the light and darkness domain, that was the same as Chinyu having 2 cards he could play with. Perhaps it was because his killing intent had become even more intense, but Chinyu's thoughts had become even more active. A saint had fought with that thing beneath the hill for an entire night, so it was impossible for him to come out unscathed. In addition, his momentum had been vast and mighty, and he had smashed down the entire way, causing him to suffer severe losses. He was far from his peak condition. His opponent's weakness was his own strength. Without a doubt, this would increase his chances of victory. Even so, this still wasn't enough. If it were so easy to slaughter a saint, then the so-called Saint Dao would simply be child's play. Chinyu wrapped a finger on his forehead. "Do you have any ideas?" He was naturally asking about the old turtle. Now, Chinyu increasingly felt that risking his life to bring him back from the abyss to vast Sun City was the right decision. The old turtle bitterly smiled. "Master, I admit that my background is extremely amazing, but I am just a shadow. At most, I can be considered a not-so-ordinary shadow. But in the end, a shadow is just a shadow, it cannot represent my true form. I have some abilities, and I can be your eyes and ears, but to slaughter a saint, that is far too difficult. He was able to fight with that thing beneath the hill for an entire night without being hammered to death. I really can't do anything about how strong he is. Qin Yu's expression didn't change. Is it really impossible? Master, slaughtering a saint is too dangerous. We have other paths, so there really isn't a need to go this far. The old turtle spit flew out. Last night, I racked my brains and finally found a method that has a high chance of deceiving a saint and leaving this place. Speak clearly. Cough, it's this method. It can only be used by Master alone. It won't work if you bring others with you. The old turtle dryly chuckled. Master, I've already tried my best, but I can't improve it any further. So what do you think? Cough, cough, this is what I think. We aren't familiar with Peach, so there is no need for us to risk our lives for her. Moreover, she has a peak true saint father. Perhaps she won't even dare to chase after a saint, right? It's fine as long as we can preserve our own lives. Qin Yu's lips twitched. This old turtle fellow, was he trying to help him find a way out of this embarrassing situation? If it were anyone else, Qin Yu would have run away without hesitation. They weren't familiar with each other, and they didn't have a deep relationship, so there was no need for him to risk his life. But Peach couldn't. If you can't bring Peach with you, then let's not talk about this anymore. Now, let me ask you, is there any way you can help me increase my chances of killing a saint? Qin Yu had no expression. You should know that the two of us share weal and woe. If something happens to me, you won't be able to escape either. So, this isn't a request. I'm just telling you that if you want to live, it's best if you do everything you can. Don't worry about losses for now. As long as you can live, I guarantee I will make up for it. The old turtle remained silent. But in fact, although he didn't say anything, his silence was enough to explain many things. Qin Yu lightly said, what about the one who fought a saint for an entire night? Since they were born by the heavens and earth, they should be useful to you. The old turtle thoughts fluctuated. It was clear that these words had a great allure to him. But anyone could paint a picture, and the key was to have the ability to eat it. He gloomily said, Master, you can't do it. Although these blunt words were the truth, it still felt like he was tired of living. Qin Yu noted it down and lightly said, I can't, but the yard master can. If we can save Peach, that will be a great merit. If there is a great merit, there will naturally be a reward. I can ask the yard master to help. Then his tone changed, becoming as cold as the midwinter wind. I told you before that this isn't a request. If you aren't afraid of death, you can conserve your strength. The old turtle instantly cowered. Master, we agree that you must ask the yard master to help. If I really help you this time, the losses will be great. Not only will I have to spit out everything I've eaten before, but I will also have to pay a bit more. Moreover, the Saint Tao of the vast young world has already obtained the approval of the world's will. If an outsider like me kills them, even if I'm only stained with a small amount of karma, it will still be troublesome. I might even be directly erased by the world's will. When it came to matters of life and death, everything the old turtle said could only be trusted to 30% at most. He must have been exaggerating. But even if it was only 30%, there was still some danger. Otherwise, he wouldn't have acted so cowardly. Qin Yu said in a low voice, I will keep my word. Even if I can't deal with that person under the mountain, I will still compensate you in other ways. Don't worry, you will be of great use. Even if you want to die now, I can't bear to see you die. These words were clearly more useful than his previous guarantee. After thinking this through, the old turtle finally took out his own method. A bead. From the outside, it looked exactly the same as the one that Peach Maiden had formed with her two phantoms. The old turtle's voice was a bit weak, but it couldn't conceal the sinister tone within. Master, smash Peach Maiden's bead first, and then mine. Perhaps there will be an unexpected effect. The reason was obvious after a moment's thought. Without changing his expression, Qin Yu nodded. He turned his hand and put away the bead. 3 cards. Although it might not be enough, this was probably the limit of what Qin Yu could bring out. Although he had many other methods, they weren't enough to deal with a saint. The space laws, against an ordinary saint, they might be a little useful. But he had already grasped the space laws to hunt down this person, and he would definitely be able to use them more smoothly than Chinyu. As he had said before, using this to show off in front of him was the same as seeking death. Then, the only thing left was probably the time laws. In truth, Chinyu had only grasped a tiny bit of this through lucky chances and coincidences. He really had only grasped a tiny bit of it. To say that it was superficial was an insult to the word superficial. And most importantly, ever since he grasped it, it hadn't improved at all. This thought flashed in his mind for a moment before it was tossed aside. This thing was likely useless, so it was best not to waste time. Chinyu glanced at Peach Maiden. After a moment of hesitation, he picked her up and placed her in a corner. He had already decided that once he was discovered, he would summon the furnace and suck her in. Chinyu took a deep breath and looked outside the cave. Rumbling sounds continued to echo out without end. The good news was that the direction he was in wasn't being taken extra care of. According to the Saint's current speed, there was still around 2 hours left. Now he could only wait. But at this time, the old turtle suddenly opened his mouth. His voice was a bit hesitant as he slowly said, "Master, since you are about to slaughter a saint, why haven't you prepared your strongest card yet? Could it be that you want to wait until the critical moment to attack? But that's not right. If you don't prepare this first, even if you want to use it, there is no way to cut it down." Chinyu was expressionless. He lowered his head and thought about it. Strongest card in my hand? Do I have such a thing? There was an indescribable silence. Then, the old turtle raised his voice, filled with absurdity. "Master, you don't know?" Chinyu's lips twitched. That's right. He didn't know what was in his hand and had to be reminded by others. If this matter were to spread out, it would simply be a joke. But now, time was too critical. Even if he knew it was shameful, he still had to nod his head and admit it. Without giving the old turtle a chance to continue expressing his disbelief, Chinyu narrowed his eyes. "Now, you can tell me what your trump card is." The young man was expressionless. He constantly repeated the motion of pressing down. Every time he did so, the world shook and all things were crushed into powder. He stood in the air. At this time, he was like the ruler of the entire world, ruling over all slaughter and destruction, recklessly unleashing his wrath. But no one knew that beneath his calm and indifferent exterior, this ruler of the world was suffering in his heart. He had been delayed for far too long. His Tao was trembling. This was a clear restlessness that burst forth from the depths of his soul, a feeling that indicated danger was approaching. The Garden Master was coming, and soon. This was the only explanation, and the young man firmly believed it. Thus, there was very little time left for him. But even now, he hadn't been able to feel any fluctuations of strength. Peach Maiden and Chinyu, these two juniors, were actually quite courageous. They hadn't fled in fright, but this undoubtedly created more trouble for him in his pursuit. Where was it? Where was it hiding? The young man suddenly looked up. At this time, an intense intuition appeared in his mind. Without any doubt or time to verify it, he stepped forwards and vanished from sight. In the blink of an eye, the young man tore through space and stepped out. He lifted a hand and pressed it forwards. Bang! A terrifying strength descended like a towering mountain. Massive tracts of space collapsed, and an aura of despair and annihilation covered the surrounding 10 miles. In the next moment, the young man's eyes brightened. Bang! Light and darkness abruptly erupted from the ground, rapidly expanding and spreading, condensing into a domain. He had found it. Chapter 12:37. At first glance, Chinyu discovered that things had deviated from his expectations. At this time, it wasn't a shadow that attacked, but a callous young man. Even though he seemed to be young, his eyes were indifferent and ghastly, and they revealed the experience of experiencing the passage of time. But their auras were the same. Chinyu had personally experienced the overbearingness and disdain of this press, so it was impossible for him to be wrong. Therefore, it was easy to conclude that the saint behind the black shadow had personally descended. Of course, there was a difference between controlling the shadow to intercept and attacking with one's own body. At the very least, the power that could be unleashed was not on the same level. It was such a simple logic. No matter how easy it was to use a puppet, it was still better to use it personally. Soon, Qin Yu's judgment was verified. The light and darkness domain crazily twisted, and an extremely terrifying power surged out like an endless tide. Initially, he thought that his light and darkness domain would at least be able to withstand 2 punches, but now, it seemed like even 1 punch would be difficult. When Qin Yu saw the young man, his eyes fell on Peach Girl. The furnace was translucent, so it didn't obstruct his vision. The vision of a Saint Dao was naturally much sharper than Qin Yu's. Just by looking at her, he could determine that Peach Girl's situation wasn't too good. It was likely that she had been unconscious for a long period of time. In other words, there was a high chance that the trap he fell into was not set up by Peach. In that case, it could only be Qin Yu. Tripping 3 times in a row in the same ditch, 2 times in the same ditch, and 1 time in the same ditch, although the number of times was the same, the meaning was not the same. Since when did the Sage Dao become someone who could scheme against anyone and had the ability to scheme successfully? Did he not care about his reputation? He glanced at Qin Yu from the corner of his eyes. In his heart, he had already sentenced Qin Yu to death. But the most important thing today was Peach Girl. He would let him live a little longer. Ka-cha, ka-cha. In the end, the light and darkness domain couldn't withstand the Saint's punch. With a miserable shattering sound, it collapsed into countless pieces and dissipated. A mocking look appeared in the young man's eyes. The fusion of light and darkness was indeed powerful, but it also depended on who was using it. The absolute difference in power was not something that could be made up for with 1 or 2 trump cards. You want to be a hero and save the damsel in distress? He was still too inexperienced to rely on such methods. He raised his hand and grabbed forward, targeting Peach. Space suddenly distorted as a large, translucent hand appeared and descended towards the great furnace. As if sensing the threat, dark red lines suddenly appeared on the surface of the silent great furnace. The air immediately became scorching hot. With a deep rumble, the dark red lines on the surface of the great furnace wildly released light. The translucent body of the furnace shook and rippled. At this moment, Qin Yu could feel an urgent summoning from the furnace. A sharp light flashed in his eyes. He turned his hand and took out the lump of iron. With a whistling sound, it flew out on its own and instantly fused into the furnace. As if it had obtained the support of a formidable strength, the furnace emitted a deep rumbling sound. The shaking ripples vanished, and the dark red lines on its surface became even more dazzling. The temperature in the air rose once more, forcefully resisting the grasp of a saint. Qin Yu relaxed a little. This was the best result he had expected. The furnace could resist a saint, even if it was only for a short period of time. Otherwise, it would be like what happened just now. If a saint completely ignored Qin Yu and directly attacked Peach Blossom, things would become much more troublesome. After all, the card in his hand could only be used to kill people. It was impossible for him to protect Peach Blossom. If she forcefully collided with a saint, the resulting shockwaves might directly kill her. The young man stared at the great furnace. A sharp light exploded in his eyes, revealing shock and astonishment that finally turned into burning heat. He turned his head and looked at Qin Yu. His lips curved up in a smile. Since you want to die, then I will help you. By relying on the unity of light and darkness, he had taken advantage of refined one's unstable breakthrough into the saint realm and the backlash of the world to kill him on the spot. This was Qin Yu's most glorious accomplishment. But in the eyes of a saint, it wasn't worth mentioning at all. Moreover, the light and darkness domain had been broken, and Qin Yu was a piece of meat on a chopping board. He could cut him however he wanted. Originally, all of this was correct, but the cards in Qin Yu's hand were far more compatible with his cultivation. So, even a piece of meat placed on a chopping board had been frozen in an extremely cold cave for countless years and was as hard as iron. To cut him however he wanted wasn't realistic. Moreover, if he wasn't careful, there was a chance that this sharp knife would break. If a saint was compared to a knife, then it was certainly the sharpest kind in the world. If time could be reversed, the young man swore that he would definitely use his full strength and not be careless at all. But unfortunately, he hadn't grasped the law of time. Even if he did, he wouldn't be able to do this. Sometimes, everything that seemed absurd and unbelievable was already predestined from the very beginning. The young man raised his hand. Although it was only a finger, the power that burst out from it was enough to crush most cultivators below the saint realm. Not to mention Xinyu, a small snake that had its only poisonous tooth pulled out. Killing him would be a piece of cake. Strictly speaking, this wasn't carelessness. It was just that the power that Xinyu possessed couldn't be measured by normal standards. So what welcomed this finger was a translucent bead. There were 2 peach blossoms in it, rotating with each other as the origin. Peach slapped her forehead twice. 2 shadows came out of her body and fused into this thing. Previously, she had used Broken Shadow to help Xinyu resist the attack of a saint. Now, this bead was definitely more powerful. Although he had expected this, the moment it exploded, Xinyu discovered that he had underestimated the might of this bead. This wasn't as simple as 1 + 1 being greater than 2. Rather, it was far, far greater, so much so that one would be caught off guard. For instance, the young man was panicking at this moment. He never thought that Xinyu, who was already a piece of meat on the chopping block, would be able to give him such a pleasant surprise. As the bead shattered, the 2 peach blossoms were annihilated. The strength released at the same time completely submerged the young man. To perish together with the enemy. Tragic and ruthless. The intensity of this strength was somewhat dangerous to a saint, but it wasn't too serious. But what was terrifying about it was that it contained a formidable destructive attribute. It could even cause some damage to a saint's great Tao. This was the most terrifying aspect. If he were in perfect condition, the young man might not be afraid. But in order to buy time to recover, he had used his great Tao to suppress his injuries. This had already damaged his great Tao, and now that he was injured by the power of the peach blossoms, it was the same as adding injury to injury. Of course, even if he was injured, this damage was far from enough to sever his great Tao. But the young man had taken the risk of making a deal with sage scholatry and plotting against the yardmaster. His goal was to pierce through the sea of bitterness and reach the other shore, to become a true sage vast yang, and perhaps even to take another step forward and peek into the ruler's Tao. After all, to the Saint Tao circle that had already stepped onto the peak of the world, the fact that a ruler was incomplete wasn't too big of a secret. With such ambition, he certainly couldn't tolerate the damage to his great Tao. Not only would it take a massive amount of time to repair it, but more importantly, it might affect his future cultivation. Of course not. So, the young man would rather bear more damage than allow his great Tao to be damaged. The most direct consequence of this was that his current state was extremely miserable. It was truly miserable. His entire body was covered in wounds, corroded by the destructive strength. Large swathes of rot and ulcers appeared, with no flesh or blood remaining. If he didn't see this with his own eyes, who would believe that a dignified saint would end up in such a state because he chased down 2 juniors? But now, after Xinyu recovered from his surprise, his complexion wasn't too good. This was even if he knew that the stronger the bead peach maiden gave him, the greater his chances of killing a saint would be. This was because the stronger the bead was, the greater the price peach maiden had to pay. She herself definitely didn't have the strength to threaten a powerful saint-level expert. But now, with just 2 slaps on the head, she was able to accomplish this. That might have seemed simple, but 2 slaps on the head naturally couldn't be that simple. As Xinyu thought of the changes that had occurred to Peach Maiden, his heart became increasingly heavy. Then, he looked at the saint with an even colder gaze. If he hadn't chased them down, Peach Maiden wouldn't have had to risk her life, and she wouldn't have had to pay such a heavy price. Being shrouded by Qinyu's icy gaze, the young man's anger and displeasure reached the peak. These 2 ant-like things had forced a dignified saint into such a miserable state, and yet they still dared to look at him like this? What qualifications did they have? What gave them the courage to do so? Kill him. They had to kill him. Immediately. The young man's eyes were icy cold. Killing intent surged out from their depths. And at this time, Qinyu's thoughts were roughly the same. The only difference was that if the young man wanted to kill Qinyu, he would need to endure it and wait for the strength of the bead to reseed. But Qinyu didn't need to wait, and he didn't want to wait either. Light flashed in his palm, and another bead appeared. Even though killing intent surged in his heart, the young man still subconsciously widened his eyes. To be able to cause a saint to suffer so much and even cause an impact on their own great Tao, this sort of method could be called terrifying. For someone who wasn't a saint to take out a single bead was already astonishing, much less taking out two in a row. He had miscalculated. The young man felt a trace of regret. He should have killed Qinyu first. But thinking about this now was clearly meaningless. The reason was that he had no way to reverse time. Seeing Qinyu's killing intent rise and the second bead in his hand, the distressed young man roared out loud. Thump! Thump! Within his chest, his heartbeat sped up, as if some critical point had been opened. Boundless blood vitality erupted. Peepa! Peepa! On the surface of the young man's rotten body, a large piece of rotten flesh exploded at the same time, turning into a thick red blood energy that wrapped around him. This was a method he had prepared for crossing the sea of bitterness in the future. Before he had time to cultivate it, it had exploded in advance today. Of course, there was a huge gap between the power and expectations, but it was still no problem to use it to resist the second bead. In the blood energy, the young man's eyes became colder and colder. This method was not easy to obtain, and once it exploded, it could never be rebuilt. In other words, his chances of reaching the nirvana realm in the future had been reduced by 1 point because of Qinyu. Even if it was a very small number, perhaps in the future, he lacked this bit of foundation to reach the great Tao. In the end, he failed at the last step, and there was no hope of reaching the nirvana realm. There had never been a lack of half-saints who died because of the corrosion of the sea of bitterness. The young man was very clear about all of this, so he was naturally furious. If his eyes could kill, Qinyu would have already turned into ashes. 2 beads in a row. I want to see how many cards you have. When you fall in my hands, I will let you know what it means to regret coming to this world. But soon, the young man didn't think so. His eyes suddenly widened, and his face showed anger. Because he had been tricked again. The 2 beads looked exactly the same, and even had the same aura, but in fact they were 2 completely different things. It had nothing to do with counterfeits, but it was more terrifying. What was released was a power that went straight to the soul, to tear everything apart. Chapter 12:38. He had made a mistake in his judgment, and all the blood vitality he had exploded had been wasted. The young man was endlessly depressed and annoyed, but soon he wasn't in the mood to care. This was because the strength that had struck his soul and then exploded was far too terrifying. It was so terrifying that even his solemn Saint Tao soul couldn't withstand it. In other words, he actually felt an incomparably strong and dangerous aura. It was like the skies were dark and gloomy, so oppressive that it was hard to breathe. This was probably the smell of life and death. The young man felt a bit absurd. He had actually been forced into such a state by a mere junior. But whether or not this was absurd wasn't important. What was important was that this was reality. There was a chance that his soul would be torn apart and he would perish here. Of course, killing a Saint Tao wasn't so simple. The young man had been forced into such a state because he bore the brunt of the attack and didn't want his great Tao to be damaged. But in the current situation, he certainly couldn't have such thoughts. Although it was hard to accept that his great Tao was damaged, it was still much better than being killed. Bang! A loud explosion sounded out from deep within his soul. The young man used the great Tao as a beam to block the soul-tearing strength and transfer the damage. At this time, his lips twitched. A saint's great Tao was their foundation and was closely related to their life. They could clearly sense even the slightest change. At this time, injuries were added to his injuries. His great Tao had been damaged, and it was even more serious than he expected. 1,000 years. This injury would require at least 1,000 years to gradually repair and restore his great Tao. This also meant that the young man's breakthrough to the other shore would be delayed by at least 1,000 years. To be tormented in the sea of bitterness, to chase after the other shore, if one didn't advance, then they would be forced back. To be trapped in the sea of bitterness for 1,000 years meant that the barriers to the boundary would become thicker and the difficulty of breaking through would become greater. It definitely wasn't as simple as delaying it for 1,000 years. Completely severing the road to true sainthood might be an exaggeration, but at the very least, the difficulty had increased by a great deal. Although it took a long time to describe, the truth was that in an instant, the young man had already come to a conclusion. He glared at Qin like a knife. This time, he had suffered a great loss. Even if he obtained it in the end, the trade item that Scholar Sage gave him might not have been effective. In other words, he had taken the risk to attack Peach Girl. Everything he did was likely to be for nothing. And this result was all because of Qin Yu. How could he not hate him in no end? Saints were condensed from their own grand Daos, and they could be regarded as a world of their own. Even though it wasn't the same in reality, it was still extremely terrifying. Being enveloped by the young man's eyes, Qin Yu could hear cracking sounds in his ears. His breathing became difficult, as if his entire body would soon be frozen and sealed away. Miserable howls assaulted his ears, and they seemed to have come from the 9th level of hell. The pain, despair, ruthlessness, and madness within them were capable of invading his mind and causing him to be extremely terrified or have his will collapse. However, his eyes were as calm as ever. The sun-moon force field enveloped him. Everything else was discarded within it, leaving behind only coldness and indifference. Qin Yu stared at the youth. He was waiting. He was waiting for the youth to completely go crazy and then deliver himself to him on his own initiative. That was because his strongest trump card could only be used once, and it could not be separated from his body. Only when the distance was close enough would he be able to unleash its full power. It was also because the round bead given by the old turtle had more than just what the young man was enduring now. He would soon find out what kind of terrible price he would have to pay for this misjudgment. This price was something that even a saint would go crazy over. The young man froze. Now his rotting flesh had burst open and his soul had been severely wounded. Even his great Tao had been shaken and damaged. He could be called pitiful to the extreme, but it wasn't until now that he realized he had still underestimated Qin Yu. This little bastard, what a vicious and overbearing method. The great Tao as a beam blocked the tearing strength in his soul, causing his great Tao to be damaged. But this wasn't the most serious thing. This was because the young man could sense the icy cold strength that was encroaching on his great Tao. It was constantly plundering the young man's great Tao. And what was even more terrifying was that there was nothing he could do about it. His great Tao was damaged to begin with, and now it was being constantly plundered. If he didn't change this, the only result would be his great Tao disappearing. And to the Saint Tao, disappearing meant death. Without the support of the great Tao, the endless sea of bitterness could easily corrode them. This was truly a matter of life and death. The young man looked at Qin Yu. He could feel that the icy cold strength that was nibbling away at his great Tao originated from Qin Yu. If he killed Qin Yu, everything would return to normal. Otherwise, he would die here today. His countless years of bitter cultivation and ambitions would all turn into illusions. Even though things had come to this step, the young man still couldn't figure out how Qin Yu was able to accomplish this. Just how many secrets were hidden on this junior's body. But none of this was important. What was important was that he had to die. Bang! The young man instantly erupted. For a Saint Tao that was facing the threat of death to erupt with such strength, it was hard to imagine unless one personally experienced it. In an instant, the remnant strength of the Peach Girl's bead, the soul-tearing strength of the old turtle's bead, was completely shaken away. Of course, in order to accomplish this, the young man had paid a sufficiently high price. He took a step forward and space twisted. The young man vanished. When he reappeared, he was right in front of Chinyu. He lifted a hand and pressed forwards. Bang! With a heaven-shaking explosion, Chinyu's ears buzzed. He seemed to see a great river rushing forwards, running through the endless heavens and earth, with no end in sight. And at this time, this great river soared into the skies, turning into a giant dragon. It howled forwards, opening its jaws and tearing at him. The purple moon and blue sun trembled at the same time. The sun and moon force fields shook with them. Chinyu's eyes instantly became clear and bright, a sharp light erupting from them. He knew that the great river he saw before and the great river that turned into a giant dragon was the young man's great Tao, and also the strongest and most dangerous hidden card of a saint. If one used their great Tao to attack, they could erupt with the strongest strength of the Saint Tao. But if their great Tao was damaged, the consequences would be dire. Now was the time. Chinyu lifted his hand and slashed forwards. At this time, the phantom of a sun and moon appeared behind him. To the left was a great sun. It blazed endlessly, its blazing heat capable of burning all to ashes. To the right was a silver moon. It shined with a bright halo and an icy cold aura that seemed capable of penetrating all things between the heavens and earth. Blazing heat and icy cold. As Chinyu lifted his hand, they instantly fused together. Thus, the phantom of the sun and moon fused together. An extremely blurry phantom appeared between the sun and moon. It lifted a hand and condensed a sword phantom, slashing forwards with Chinyu. This slash was silent, without any change in the world. All one could hear was the earth-shaking aura of a saint erupting with all their strength, causing the world to cry out in grief. But at this time, the young man's pupils shrank and his body stiffened. Fear erupted from the depths of his heart like a great tide. This aura, impossible, this was absolutely impossible. But his instincts screamed out in despair, clearly telling him that his senses weren't wrong. The young man finally understood why a mere Chinyu was able to cause him to suffer losses again and again, even bringing out so many hidden cards that he shouldn't have. If this was the case, then everything could be explained. And he actually dared to move. Even if he was a Saint Tao cultivator, there was only death waiting for him. But understanding was one thing. In the face of death, no one was willing to face it head-on. Even if there was a slim chance, he still had to grasp it with all his strength. Moreover, there was another possibility. Chinyu's identity hadn't been fully recognized yet. Otherwise, Vasun would have known long ago, and he wouldn't have made such a low-level mistake. Then, if he killed Chinyu, one result would be to be erased, and the other would be to obtain favor or even replace him. Similar matters had occurred before in the endless river of time of Vast Sunday. The worst result was still death. So he had to give it his all. Bang! His aura erupted once more. The space around Chinyu froze over. A Saint Tao cultivator didn't hesitate to pay any price and use a method that damaged the space laws to attack. The resulting effect was certainly astonishing. Chinyu's thoughts were clear. But now, he was like a fish frozen in water, unable to move at all. Affected by him, the sun and moon phantom also stopped slashing down. This sword was right in front of the young man, just a foot away. All it needed to do was gently stab forward and everything would end. But it stopped in midair, having lost the strength to continue. The young man violently shivered. His body that had lost all flesh and blood was fierce and terrifying. He glared at Chinyu. He changed his mind. He wouldn't kill Chinyu so easily. That was simply too wasteful. He would eat him up bit by bit. Perhaps this could help him obtain some special medium from Chinyu's body that could be recognized. Even if there was only a slight possibility, the young man wasn't willing to let it go. To an immortal saint, there was nothing in this world more terrifying than death. As long as there was a slight chance to refuse death, he would firmly grasp onto it. Chinyu could feel the terror and his shock of the saint across from him. Although he wasn't too sure what this card was, he could already determine its strength through this. But now, even though he had played this card, it was still a bit lacking and couldn't produce the strength it should have. The eyes of the young man across from him caused Qin Yu's heart to turn cold and his scalp to tingle. He was well aware that if he couldn't kill his opponent, what awaited him would be an extremely pitiful fate. What to do? What to do? At this time, the old turtle roared out, "Master, kill him!" Then, with a loud bang, a mass of flames began to burn within Qin Yu's body. With the price of burning itself, the strength contributed by the old turtle was instantly poured into Qin Yu's body. Ever since he began perceiving the time laws, he hadn't made any progress. But now, they suddenly became active. Qin Yu didn't have time to think about why the old turtle could help him. He roared out time. A trace of vibration appeared with Qin Yu as the center. It swept through the entire world, causing afterimages to appear. This originated from the change in the flow of time. The shaking world itself began to conflict and become unstable. This caused a hole to be forcefully torn open in the imprisonment of the space laws. "Break for me!" Qin Yu opened his mouth and roared. Countless wounds appeared on the surface of his body, and blood dyed his robes red. "Kacha, Kacha!" Space collapsed. Qin Yu slashed out his palm. The phantom of the sun and moon slashed down with its sword. Then the entire world suddenly fell into absolute silence. Chapter 1239. Kacha! There was a light sound, like the sound of a pine branch being crushed in the silent snowy plains. When the snow fell to the ground, it triggered a world-shaking avalanche. However, this was not a snowfield, so there were no pine branches that were crushed. That soft sound was the great path of a saint being directly cut in half by a very, very sharp sword. The collapse of the great Tao, the death of a saint, the resonance of the heavens and earth, and all living things grieved. It was true that the heavens and earth were resonating, but all living things grieved, because they couldn't help but grieve. Anyone who was living a good life suddenly faced a calamity and was about to pay with their life. Wouldn't they grieve from the bottom of their heart? Qin Yu didn't expect that after using all his strength to cut down, he would encounter such a situation. After all, he had also cut down Lien Yi, who had stepped into the sea of bitterness. Everything had been peaceful. If he died, he died. Nothing happened. There was a high probability that it was because Lien Yi's Tao had shattered before it could be recognized by the heavens and earth. Of course, this was only a guess. There was no guarantee that it was true. Moreover, at this time, Qin Yu still had the time to think about this. He felt that his heart was quite big. The young man in front of him was indeed very sorry. As a saint, from the moment he appeared until the moment of his death, he didn't have a real name. He looked down at his chest, which was as good as new. His eyes could clearly see that the bloody wound had cut off his life force. Light and darkness, time and space. The young man could somewhat understand why a mere Qin Yu could be chosen by such an existence. He was indeed a junior with endless potential and heaven-defying talent. But unfortunately, the yard master didn't have time to teach him. Was it dangerous to kill a saint who had attained the Tao a long time ago and was willing to submit to the vast sun? This time he was indeed blind. He chased after him for thousands of miles and insisted on delivering his head. But even if a saint was blind, he was still a saint. If he could drag Qin Yu down with him in the end, it wouldn't be too shameful to go to hell with such a proud son of heaven. If he could live, scholar sage, damn you, I'll be waiting for you in hell. With this final thought, the young man's lips curled up. In the next moment, he was like a statue that had been silent for thousands of years, disintegrating into dust with the wind. Then it was time for all living things to grieve. An extremely terrifying shockwave erupted from where he had disappeared. It was like a comet crashing into the earth, and the shockwave swept out in an instant. The space shattered as countless cracks spread out in all directions. It was as if an invisible hand had grabbed hold of this world and then twisted it with all its might. There were all kinds of sensations. Qin Yu didn't even have time to curse before he was sucked in. He really wanted to curse. It was a fair fight. Although I cheated and borrowed other people's strength, with the difference in our cultivation levels, it shouldn't be a big deal, right? Why was it that he had to risk his life again after risking his life? Risking his life until his entire body was bleeding profusely after finally killing him. If he couldn't hold on, he would die. This was too unfair. But in the end, he kept these curses in his heart. First, it was because saving his life was more important. He couldn't do anything that would waste his energy. Secondly, there was no such thing as absolute fairness in this world. If one felt dissatisfied, one could train as hard as he could and become like this. Even if he was killed, he could still set off a super big firecracker. At that time, even if others wanted to kill him, they would have to think twice. It was also a form of capital. There was more nonsense to be said, but this was probably Qin Yu's current emotional fluctuations. The reason why he was still having such chaotic thoughts in this life and death torment was related to the young man who had just died. That incomparably cold and callous pat, 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 pat. That sort of indifferent attitude that all below the saint realm were ants. So what if he slaughtered them all? That had indeed impacted the bottom line in Qin Yu's heart. At this time, after slaughtering a saint a second time and then lighting up this super firecracker, all living beings couldn't help but feel sad. In truth, this was no different from the pat, 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 pat of the young man. It was a sort of indifference and callousness that seeped into his bones. Saint Tao. In Qin Yu's mind, these two words tumbled over and over again until they finally became a stone tablet in front of him. The future was too far away, and everything would depend on variables. Then, he would first set a small goal. For instance, stepping into the sea of bitterness and achieving the Saint Tao. In fact, this was definitely not a small goal. If others knew that Qin Yu dared to have such thoughts in his near-death situation, they would likely curse out loud. What a reckless brat who didn't know how high the heavens were and how deep the earth was. There were millions upon millions of cultivators in Great Sunday, not to mention achieving the Saint Tao. How many could even see the sea of bitterness from afar? Not to mention that Qin Yu was now a piece of trash who hadn't even touched the threshold of original God. Qin Yu didn't know that the small goal he set in his heart was enough to drown him in spittle. Just like Scholar Sage, who didn't hesitate to start the sacred war to stall the Yardmaster with all his might, he never would have thought that his plan would ultimately fail so miserably. It was natural to use the phrase long and fruitless to describe his battle with the Yardmaster. Everyone knew very well that everyone wanted to kill the other, but no one could kill the other. But the person chasing after Peach Blossom was simply too slow. If it weren't for the fact that Scholar Sage had obtained one of the other party's life gates during the exchange, he would have suspected that the other party had cheated midway and fled with the trade item. He waited and waited, and in the end, a saint died. Even with Scholar Sage's shrewdness, he couldn't help but frown. Shock flashed through his eyes. Lien Yi's death was indeed unexpected, but in the end, he was just a junior who relied on external means to grow quickly. The one who chased after Peach Girl had lived for a very long time. His strength was far from what Lien Yi, who had just entered the Saint Path, could compare to. But in the end, he was killed. The void outside the East Sea was incomparably dark and empty. It was enough for two true saints to fight and absorb the impact of the terrifying power. At this moment, the battle paused for a moment. The Yardmaster's calm voice came from the opposite peach tree. I didn't expect him to be the one who did it, Scholar Sage said in a low voice. You were prepared? The Yardmaster said, of course. But at this moment his voice suddenly stopped. He sensed an aura suddenly appear, but it was very far away from the place where the saint died. It wasn't him. Then who caused the saint's death? The Yardmaster tried his best to control himself, but the distance between them was too close. Scholar Sage could still feel some changes in his emotions. The face that appeared on the sky-supporting ancient scholar tree revealed a strange and emotional expression. It wasn't you, the Yardmaster said indifferently. So what? Scholar Sage was silent. The Yardmaster was right. No matter who killed the saint, his plan had failed. He'd spent a lot of effort and time to set up this plan. All aspects were close to perfection, but in the end, it was all for naught. Buzz, the sky-supporting ancient scholar tree disappeared, and Scholar Sage, who was dressed in a green robe, appeared. He raised his hand and clenched it. Since that person was dead and the deal had not been completed, he naturally had to take back the reward he had given him. Then, today's matter could come to an end. Of course, this was only the end of the storm. After this, there would be countless undercurrents between the Peach Garden, the East Sea, and the West Mountain. But Scholar Sage was not afraid. To consider victory, one had to consider defeat first. Before he made his move, he was already prepared to return empty-handed. The West Mountain might have to pay a price, and some people might even die, but as long as he was alive, the West Mountain would always be the West Mountain. But at this moment, Scholar Sage's expression changed. He was even more shocked than before when he sensed the saint's death. Because at this moment, someone was actually trying to steal the reward he had paid for the deal. The Tao connotation of the Nirvana true saint. Black Shadow half-saint. Well, he should be given a name. After all, the dead were more important, and he was an ancient half-saint. He had lived for many years, and if nothing unexpected happened, he would continue to live for many, many years in the future. If it weren't for the fact that he hadn't been able to find the possibility of stepping onto the other shore, and if it weren't for the fact that Scholar Sage had given him a reward that he couldn't refuse, how could a half-saint that knew how tyrannical the Garden Master was be willing to take the risk of killing Peach Blossom? This reward was Scholar Sage's great Tao connotation. Although it was only a tiny bit, one could still use it to peek into the other shore and guide one's cultivation. There was no need to mention the past, and there was also no need to mention that Scholar Sage had already tampered with this Tao connotation. The chances of the Black Shadow half-saint obtaining it in the end were extremely small. In short, someone was trying to steal it from him, and they even had the advantage. This was simply ridiculous. It had to be known that he was the Nirvana true saint, and this Tao connotation was originally something that belonged to him. Unless a ruler made a move, Scholar Sage couldn't think of anyone who could have a greater advantage than him. But this time, it definitely wasn't a ruler. Scholar Sage was sure of this. Thus, at this moment, Scholar Sage only had a single thought in his mind. He wanted to descend to the location of his Tao connotation and find the person who wanted to steal it, and tear that person to shreds. Although he couldn't lock onto the aura of the person who stole his Tao connotation, his intuition told him that the reason why the Black Shadow half-saint had perished was because of this person. Bang! The void dimension instantly shattered. Scholar Sage turned around and was about to leave when the Garden Master laughed loudly. "You and I haven't seen each other in so many years. Since we fought today, why don't we fight a few more 1,000 rounds? Let me see just how much you've improved over the years." Before her voice fell, the peach branch swept over, instantly sealing the void dimension and dragging Scholar Sage to the ground. The method that Scholar Sage had used to entangle the Garden Master and prevent him from escaping was now returned to him. Because he had successfully stalled the Garden Master, Scholar Sage knew that if the Garden Master insisted on keeping him here, it would be difficult for him to escape. Scholar Sage turned his head to look at Peach Blossom, his eyes cold. "Do you really want to see someone steal my Tao connotation? Don't forget the relationship between you and me." The Garden Master was silent for a moment. Then she chuckled. "You're right. But after so many years, I've naturally prepared a response. So what if someone steals my Tao connotation? I'd like to see who dares to find me in Peach Blossom Garden." This was a breakdown of the conversation. Scholar Sage took a step forward. The body of the heaven-supporting ancient scholar tree suddenly erupted. Billions of thick branches covered the sky and smashed towards the other side. The Garden Master laughed. Peach Blossom didn't show any weakness. Similarly, branches and leaves shot out and collided with Scholar Sage's body. Thus, in this pitch-black void dimension, thunder rumbled and roared. Radiation swept out for thousands of miles. Chinyu felt like he was about to die. The vast unworld was truly awesome. In order to mourn the death of a saint, the firecrackers they set off were astonishingly powerful. At this time, he had used all his trump cards. He couldn't use his strongest move to slay a saint. When he needed help the most, he found that his biggest helper couldn't even take care of himself. The old turtle was growling as if he had bitten something and was desperately pulling it towards him. He didn't even have the strength to speak. Chinyu had threatened him. If he didn't help, he would really die. But this time, death didn't scare the old turtle away. Or perhaps the thing in his mouth was so delicious that he wasn't even afraid of death for the time being. Chinyu had no choice but to sigh. With a slight movement of his mind, the cauldron roared and sucked him in. He instantly felt relaxed. But now, looking at the crimson lines on the surface of the cauldron, which was in a state of intense distortion, he couldn't really relax. In particular, as Chinyu entered, the distortion became even more intense. As the saying went, all things mourn together. It could be seen that the vast sun world had fallen for the sake of the saint, and all living things around it were buried with him. All living things within range, regardless of whether they had done anything or whether they were innocent, as long as they were breathing, they were all targets of attack. It was fine if the cauldron only protected Peach Blossom, but if it also protected Chinyu, it was the same as bearing two forces. In truth, it was already so strong that it surpassed Chinyu's expectations. Thus, he didn't really want to rely on the cauldron to survive. From what he saw, if he continued to stay here and the cauldron couldn't hold on any longer, Peach Blossom would be the first to die. Chinyu couldn't let her die, so he could only choose to take the risk himself. He took several deep breaths and did his best to restore his condition. Then, he stepped out of the cauldron. Hiss, awesome. Chapter 1240. After clenching his teeth and enduring for a while, he soon reached his limit. Chinyu shouted out, "Old turtle," but as usual, there was no response. As expected, he had to rely on himself in the critical moment, but Chinyu was really curious as to what this fellow was biting so hard that he didn't even fear death. With a thought, he entered the furnace once more. He sat down cross-legged and began to restore his injuries. He didn't dare to stay in the furnace for too long. Thus, every breath of time was especially precious. After gathering a bit of strength, Chinyu opened his eyes and took a deep breath. Then, he left the furnace. He had gone all out to kill a saint, but Chinyu's condition was also terrible to the extreme. Now, he had been struck by Vast Yang's burial grade, firecracker, and was on the verge of collapse. If it weren't for the furnace giving him a brief moment to catch his breath, he feared he would have already died. But even if he was still alive, as time passed, Chinyu's condition would become increasingly worse. He could clearly sense this. He furrowed his eyebrows for a moment before composing himself. The furnace was his. Perhaps it wasn't before, but now that the lump of iron had fused back into it, that was the same as it acknowledging him. If Chinyu wanted to, he could exchange places with Peach Girl with a single thought and obtain the protection of the furnace. It could even be said that as long as Peach Girl died, he could live. The great terror that hung between life and death. If one hadn't experienced it, they would never know the despair and fear that came from the bottom of their hearts, as well as the intense desire to live. As long as there was a chance, they wouldn't want to miss it. Moreover, in Chinyu's current situation, there was a high chance he could survive with just a thought. The choice he had to make at this time was clearly more difficult and more of a test of the human heart. But from start to finish, Chinyu's eyes didn't change at all. In silence, he entered and left the furnace again and again. He never thought of throwing the unconscious Peach Girl out of the furnace in exchange for his own life force. Even at this time, Chinyu's condition was incomparably bad. He could be torn to pieces by the firecracker at any moment. Shwa. He entered the furnace once more. Chinyu sat down cross-legged. From top to bottom, there was no part of his body that was unharmed. Blood soaked his robes and dripped down from the corners of his clothes. When it smashed into the ground, it dyed the ground dark red. He gasped for breath. His chest heaved up and down, bringing with it a burning pain. His breathing was like that of a broken bellow. Suppressing the discomfort, he forced himself to close his eyes and circulate his cultivation to recover from his injuries. In the next moment, he opened his eyes and spat out several mouthfuls of blood. Blindly pursuing a rapid recovery, and accumulating more strength to resist the destructive power of the outside world, had placed a tremendous burden on him. The fact that he was able to last this long in his heavily injured state was already a testament to his tenacity and firm will. He slumped to the ground, gasping for breath in great heaving gulps. He bitterly smiled. He thought that this was probably his limit. If he went out again, he might not have the strength to come back. To be honest, just like how Qin Yu had never thought that he would be able to kill 2 saints on this trip to the East Sea to attend the birthday celebration, he also never thought that he would die so soon. Although life and death were up to fate, no one wanted to die. But in this situation, Qin Yu had no other choice. In order to protect Peach Blossom, he had to endure all of this. But the problem was that even now, Peach Maiden still didn't know why Qin Yu had risked his life to save her. Thinking about it, when Peach wakes up from her coma in the near future, will she be puzzled? Is our new junior brother stupid? Qin Yu couldn't help but bitterly smile. He knew that he didn't have much time left. After thinking for several breaths of time, he took out a jade archive and prepared to record some information within. If he died in the end, perhaps the contents of the jade archive might be able to move Peach Maiden and give Ning Ling and Yu Qi a chance to live. But at this time, Kacha! A cracking sound came from the surface of the furnace. Qin Yu bitterly smiled, but without hesitation, he tossed down the jade slip and left. He never thought that the timing would be so coincidental that he didn't even have a chance to say a few words. Bang! A wild strength rushed in from all directions, crazily invading his body as if it wanted to annihilate all of his life force. Looking at the semi-transparent furnace in front of him and the unconscious Peach Maiden within, Qin Yu sighed inwardly. This was probably fate, or perhaps this was the punishment of the vast Yang world. He had killed 2 saints in a row and had made a decision that wouldn't rest until he died. The old turtle still hadn't let go. Qin Yu was left speechless. Just what sort of thing was it that could disregard its own life? But now he really was finished. They were all in the same boat, and neither of them could think of having a good time. He gave the old turtle a final solemn reminder that they were about to die. Qin Yu closed his eyes, preparing to welcome the old turtle's desperate efforts to turn the tide, or the arrival of death. But the final result was different from what he imagined. Since the old turtle didn't do anything, Qin Yu didn't have to die here. This was because just now he had been thinking that this would be a great firecracker that wouldn't rest until he died. But after violently raging for a long time, it finally began to dissipate. Qin Yu was keenly aware of this. His heart fiercely beat in his chest. If he couldn't see any hope, then he could only wait for death. But since he could see hope, if he died like this then, that would be a great loss. He clenched his teeth, did everything he could, stubbornly persisted, never giving up. Of course, these bright words could be summed up in a single sentence. Qin Yu risked his life to persist and finally survived. He vanished into thin air. The sky was blue and the sun shined brightly. It was incomparably quiet. If it weren't for the fact that everything around him was flat land, it would have seemed as if everything that happened just now had been an illusion. Now, Qin Yu was no longer in the mood to feel sorrow or pity. How many lives had died in this calamity? He only felt that it was good that he had survived. Moreover, he warned himself in his heart that he absolutely could not fall into such a miserable and desperate situation again. Indeed, people were fickle and selfish. But Qin Yu didn't deny it. His entire body ached and his vision darkened. He really wanted to just fall asleep like this. But after lying down for a moment and calming his breathing, Qin Yu forced himself to stand up and stagger towards the great furnace. A formidable half-saint was hunting him down. Even if the true target was Peach Maiden, it was still prudent enough to give her some face. It wasn't too likely that there would be a backup plan, but he had done everything he could and added in a bit of luck in order to survive. Even if there was only the slightest risk, Qin Yu didn't want to take it. Moreover, he couldn't forget that there was still a terrifying life form here that had fought a half-saint shadow for an entire night. If it couldn't suppress its curiosity and ran over to take a look, that would be a big joke. So, he had to leave this place first. After several breaths of time, The great furnace shot into the skies. It swayed several times before determining a direction and rapidly flying away. But Chinyu was far too weak. He was so weak that even though he hadn't consumed too much energy, he still couldn't control it for too long. The great furnace flew for some time. Then, as if its wings had snapped, it crashed to the ground. There was a buzzing sound in Chinyu's ears, and his vision darkened. As his consciousness fell into darkness, he seemed to hear the old turtle's loud laughter, a cry of extreme fear mixed with pride. That fellow, did he succeed in the end? Thump, thump. In the boundless darkness, he didn't know how much time passed. It was like there was a great drum beating in his ears, and the sound drilled into his brain. Chinyu's eyelids twitched and twitched again. Finally, he opened his eyes. Then, he discovered that there was no drum in his ears. The sound came from his chest, from his wildly beating heart. There was a trace of panic and restlessness in his heart. Chinyu fiercely stood up. His head felt dizzy, and his injuries were affected. He stuffily coughed, and his face paled. He took a deep breath and steadied himself. He quickly walked towards Peach Maiden. Countless tiny chains appeared on the surface of her body. They wove together, forming a dense seal. From this chain seal, Chinyu could feel a familiar and formidable pressure. The strength of the Garden Master, Tao accumulation. These two words leapt out from the depths of his heart. Chinyu frowned, a dignified expression on his face. Perhaps because of these chains, he couldn't feel Peach Maiden's aura at all. But his rapidly beating heart and the restlessness in his heart were clearly telling him that there was a problem with Peach Maiden. As expected, it was impossible to shatter 3 shadows in a row without paying a price. When she fell into a deep slumber, Chinyu had already expected this. But now, it seemed that the price was far heavier than he had imagined. The Dragon Lady had once said that Peach Maiden had the Tao accumulation of the Garden Master on her body. She was believed to be related to the Garden Master's great Tao. But the scene in front of him clearly wasn't like this. Peach Maiden did have the Tao accumulation, but it seemed more like the Garden Master was suppressing something. And now, it seemed as if she couldn't suppress it any longer. This was because Peach Maiden's complexion was becoming increasingly pale and blue. No, it wasn't just her complexion. All of her exposed flesh and blood was turning blue and white. She was like a lifelike corpse lying in a coffin. As soon as he thought of this, Chinyu's heart palpitated. The restlessness and fear in his heart suddenly intensified. He took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. The current situation was unclear and he couldn't do anything. So the most important thing right now was to figure out what was happening. What's wrong with her? The voice was calm and didn't point out anything. But the old turtle was well aware that this question was directed at him. He thought to himself that his life was so bitter. He had just risked his life and suffered a terrifying threat of death. Before he could recover, he was being ordered around again. This is too difficult for me. But these thoughts were just thoughts. The old turtle could clearly sense Chinyu's current state of mind. In addition, when Chinyu was on the verge of death, he hadn't responded to Chinyu's repeated pleas for help. Although he hadn't responded because he was in such a state that he couldn't attack again, Chinyu might not have thought so. It was best not to provoke him. Cough, Master, don't worry. Let me sense it. Investigate. Chinyu's voice was calm. The old turtle shivered and hurriedly nodded. After several breaths of time, he said with difficulty, Master, the situation isn't good. I don't know why, but Peach Girl's soul is dissipating. Chinyu furrowed his eyebrows. You can't find a reason. The old turtle hurriedly said, The seal on Miss Peach Girl's body is too tyrannical. There's nothing I can do. Chinyu said, Can you save her? The old turtle bitterly smiled. I can't. In truth, Master, you should know that I fear death, and I fear it the most. No matter how delicious something is, it cannot be compared to death in my heart. Just now you called out to me for help. I heard you loud and clear, but controlling the time laws is extremely difficult. I only managed to do it after risking my life. Afterwards, I simply didn't have the strength to help you. This was an explanation for what had happened before. Chinyu waved his hand, interrupting him. Get to the point. The old turtle coughed. The point is that, master, I really have no way. It's true. I would never dare to lie to you. Qin Yu's complexion darkened. He looked at the unconscious Peach Girl. If it weren't for saving her, he wouldn't have had to take such a risk just now. If Peach Girl's soul had dissipated in the end, wouldn't everything have been in vain? This was an unacceptable result. She could not die. She absolutely could not die. With a deep breath, Qin Yu reached out a hand towards Peach Girl. Chapter 1241. Master. Qin Yu's hand didn't stop. Crazy, this was truly crazy. Although he had sighed with emotion countless times, the old turtle couldn't help but sigh once more. For a woman, fine, two at most, he didn't even want his life. To comprehend light and darkness, to possess both space and time, and to be chosen by such a transcendent existence at the same time. What would these three things add together? It was the future, the limitless future, bright and resplendent. As long as he didn't die midway, he was destined to illuminate the highest heavens and even have the qualifications to attack the transcendent boundary. What sort of lucky chance was this? But now, for just two women, he actually had to give up all of this? Even though he knew it was dangerous and he might even lose his life, he still didn't turn back. Stupid. He was simply stupid to the extreme. The old turtle had chosen such a master for himself. He felt deep sorrow in his heart. His master, why couldn't he be more like him? Wasn't it better to live a peaceful life? Indeed, matters of love and affection were truly harmful. But no matter how much he sighed, no matter how angry he was, no matter how sad he was, he couldn't change the fact that Qin Yu was the master and he was only a dependent. And as a dependent, he could only constantly compromise again and again, as long as Qin Yu could live. What nonsense! If Qin Yu died, would the will of the vast young world allow him to continue existing? What a dream! The old turtle was well aware that once Qin Yu died, he would be erased in the next moment. As a shadow of the abyss will, he did indeed have a deep background and an astonishing origin. But it was because of this that he became even more aware of the relationship between vast yang and the abyss. To be more precise, it was because he was the shadow of the abyss that it would be much easier for the world's will to erase him. There is a way. There is a way. The old turtle sighed, grief and helplessness intertwined in his voice. Master, let me tell you ahead of time. This method of mine can extend a life, but it can also take away a life. What I extend is the Peach Girl, and what I take away is you. Once it begins, your lives will be linked. If she dies, you will also die. Everything I say is true. I don't dare to lie to you at all. So, can we seriously consider what it means to weigh the pros and cons, what it means to be a noble child? It isn't worth it. It really isn't worth it. Qin Yu drew back his hand. In truth, I don't want to force you. I also want to live a good life. But she cannot die, at least not now. Tell me, what is it? Facing such a master, the old tortoise was in complete despair. He felt as if he had been hollowed out. Like a walking corpse, he told Meng Qi about the art of shared fate and then fell silent. He had said a great deal of words before to explain what had happened. At the same time, he had subtly reminded Qin Yu that he was in a very weak state right now. He was so weak that if there was a problem, he still wouldn't be able to help him. That's right. Not long ago, under the threat of death, the old tortoise was so scared that he almost went crazy. But now, he erupted with power beyond his ability and forcefully snatched food from the tiger's mouth. He had the last laugh in the fight. The food was indeed delicious and extraordinary. It was enough to make up for all the losses he had suffered earlier. However, this thing was very hard. Not only did it take time to eat, but it also took a long time to digest. Therefore, he would remain weak for a short period of time. With Qin Yu's intelligence, he would definitely be able to sense this. But if he pretended not to know and stubbornly insisted on going his own way, then what could the old turtle do to him? In fact, Qin Yu was well aware of just how torturous it was for someone who stood at the peak of the death-fearing world to continue forward despite knowing the dangers of death. But there were some things that one had no choice but to do. The function of the art of shared fate could be explained with a simple name. The two parties would be closely linked together and become a single community. They would live together. They would perish together. In other words, if he couldn't prevent Peach Maiden's soul from dissipating in the end, you would perish together with her. Including this time, I've already saved your life more than once. If we're lucky and both of us survive, then I hope that you'll be able to repay my kindness and return Ning Ling and Yu Qi to me. Yu muttered to himself. As the saying went, there was always a reason for something abnormal to happen. This time, he had spared no effort and even used the art of shared fate. Since they weren't close enough to each other, he would definitely be suspected. It was impossible to continue hiding it. Therefore, after this incident, Yu decided to come clean and explain everything to the Yardmaster and Peach Maiden. To be honest, this had happened much faster than Yu had imagined. But reality had come one step at a time. He could only brace himself and continue walking down this path. He lowered his head and glanced at Peach Maiden. Yu sat down cross-legged beside her and matched her breathing rhythm. Exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale. Gradually, the two of them began to breathe at the same frequency. A thin line began to appear between Yu and Peach Maiden. Then a second line, a third line, a fourth line. More and more lines appeared, gradually wrapping around the two of them and forming a cocoon around their bodies. The giant cocoon shined and flickered. The speed at which it changed between light and dark just happened to match the rhythm of their breathing. Yu could feel the terrifying suction force coming from the giant cocoon. It had nothing to do with cultivation or magic power, but was directly affecting his life level. He had already prepared himself to withstand intense pain and torment, but this terrifying suction force only lasted for a moment before disappearing. Yu frowned. His first thought was that the art of shared fate had failed. But at this moment, he felt Peach Maiden's existence. It was a familiar yet strange feeling. It was an incomparably special feeling. It was as if there was another him besides himself. This was exactly the same as what the old turtle had said about two lives in one body. In other words, the art of shared fate had succeeded. But why was the process completely different from what the old tortoise had described? It wasn't painful at all. As Yu was hesitating and puzzling over this, a sense of weariness gushed out from the depths of his heart. Then it rapidly thickened. Without giving him the slightest chance to resist, it pulled him into a deep and sweet sleep. In brief, the overall process of the holy war that took place in the Void Realm was as follows. Sage Scholatry stalled the Yardmaster first. Then the Yardmaster stalled Sage Scholatry. Then Sage Scholatry stalled the Yardmaster. The positions of the two sides changed. The first time was because Sage perished. Sage Scholatry sensed that someone was trying to steal a trace of his Tao. The second time was because the Yardmaster sensed that the soul of Peach Maiden was rapidly dissipating due to the fierce feedback from her own seal. In short, the many changes caused the two sides to fight fiercely, and both sides paid a heavy price. Before the Yardmaster went all out, Sage Scholatry laughed and left. He had stalled for long enough. Judging from the Yardmaster's reaction, Peach Maiden's soul had most likely dissipated. Sage Scholatry didn't suffer too much from the death of his son, but the Yardmaster lost Peach Maiden. Humph, that was a different story. Even if her Tao wasn't directly severed, she would at least be severely injured. Then, what he needed to do next was to wait quietly in the West Mountain for the signal that the Yardmaster had fallen into a weakened state. Then, he would take advantage of her weakness and end the entanglement and struggle between them that had lasted for countless years. Although the process was full of twists and turns, Sage Scholatry was still gratified and happy at this moment. No matter what, he had finally achieved his wish. The Yardmaster frowned, her eyes dark and gloomy. She took a step forward and instantly disappeared. She had crossed the sea of bitterness and reached the Permitha, true saint. Her space laws had already reached the peak. It was probably a bit exaggerated to say that she could arrive at any place in Vastion with a single thought. But in terms of speed, she was indeed unparalleled in the world. Peach Maiden had the Yardmaster's Tao. She could directly lock on her no matter how far she was. After several consecutive jumps, she had already traversed countless worlds. Boom! In the sky, the space suddenly distorted and immediately shattered from the inside out. A terrifying black hole appeared. The Yardmaster stepped out. Her entire body released an aura that made one feel despair. Far away, a big fellow hidden deep in the earth was ready to make a move. At this moment, it seemed to have been hit in the head by a stick. It froze on the spot. It had already lived here for countless years. Except for the period when it was just born and weak, it had always been the ruler of the entire world. All the living creatures here prostrated at its feet, worshipping it and revering it. But who knew what had happened? First, two little things had barged in, and then a very powerful fellow had come. It was indeed very powerful. It had fought fiercely with it on its home ground for an entire night. Although it had suffered some losses, in fact, it didn't feel good either. Otherwise, after committing such an offensive act, how could it leave here alive? Haha, how naive. Before it could think of a way to find a chance to kill off this powerful opponent, after a wave of earth-shattering fluctuations, he actually died. The big fellow was sure that it had not sensed wrongly. Even if this was not its home ground, it was still a saint who had died. Only a blind person would not be able to see it. And the one who had done all this and killed this powerful opponent was actually one of the two little things that it had not taken seriously before. What had happened to this world? How could a dignified saint be killed so casually? If not for the fact that they had experienced it themselves, they would never have believed it. But there was no doubt that this was the truth. The big fellow was afraid. Nonsense. How could it not be afraid? Although it could not sense the specific process clearly, at least for 2 moments, it had felt a fatal threat. Every one of them was enough to push it into the abyss of death. Therefore, until a long time after the battle ended, the big fellow did not dare to act rashly. It waited and waited until no one left the realm. Only then did the thoughts that were shrouded in fear come to life. Could it be that it was a lose-lose situation? After all, it was the slaughter of a saint, killing a powerful saint and triggering the destruction of Hao Yang's will. How could it be possible that it was unscathed? Could it be that my opportunity has arrived? Just when the big fellow was getting more and more excited and was about to lose control of its cautiousness, the sky broke. Then a person walked out from inside. The big fellow swore that it had never seen such a terrifying creature in its life. It was too terrifying. Because of its origin, the big fellow's senses had always been extremely sharp. Therefore, it could clearly feel the deterrence from the Yardmaster. Although it had said it once, it felt that it was not enough. It had to repeat it 3 times. Terrifying. So terrifying. It was so scared. Chapter 1242. In the Yardmaster's senses, the big guy hiding in the ground was like a lighthouse in the dark, extremely eye-catching. With murderous intent, the big guy's heart twitched the moment his gaze fell on it. Its only thought was, "This person wants to kill me." With a scream, it turned around and fled. With a bang, the space exploded and it directly broke through the boundary. Obviously, when faced with such a ruthless person with murderous intent, it would rather stay and wait for death than run for its life. After a night of fierce battle with a black shadow saged to be, the big guy, who was the master of this world, was scared away from the world it had lived in for countless years by a single gaze. The Yardmaster was speechless for a moment. She could confirm with a glance that the big guy had nothing to do with Peach Girl's accident. She did not expect that it would be scared away by a single glance. However, at this moment, the Yardmaster was not in the mood to care about the big guy that was fleeing in a hurry. She took a step forward and suddenly disappeared. The next moment, as the space collapsed, the Yardmaster stepped out and saw the big furnace half buried in the soil, as well as the big cocoon in it. Whoosh! She exhaled, and a strong wind rose between heaven and earth. Countless thick trees were uprooted and thrown into the air to be smashed to pieces. Was it not exaggerated? But this was the incomparably powerful strength that the true Nirvana saint possessed. Because of this, the Dragon Sage had prevented the Yardmaster from fighting with the Scholar Sage in the East Sea. Once the two true Sage-level giants were really angry, the aftermath of their battle was enough to destroy the world. That was why there were so many twists and turns in the boundary illusionary divine battle. The big cocoon flashed and disappeared, completely isolating the internal and external chi. However, such a short distance was enough for the Yardmaster to sense Peach Girl. Although her condition was not very good, it had stabilized. And the one who had helped Peach Girl survive from the hopeless situation was the other person in the big cocoon, Chinyu, the 9th disciple of the Peach Garden. He was the last disciple of the Peach Garden who had decided to accept him as a disciple. The Yardmaster's eyes flickered slightly and became incomparably deep. It seemed that after today, he should have a good talk with this disciple as soon as possible. Buzz, the space vibrated. The Yardmaster turned her head and took a look. Her expression was indifferent, and her eyes were even more indifferent. The next moment, a fist punched out and grabbed the broken space crack, dragging the body out forcefully. Master! The head that popped out was now dripping with sweat. At first, it was happy, but then it panicked. Listen to my explanation. There's a reason for it. The Yardmaster grabbed his neck and pulled him out like a spring onion. She said expressionlessly, "The wine cellar in the yard is very dirty. I'll clean it up when I get back." The young man who was caught had a distressed look on his face, but he didn't dare to refute and obediently agreed. His master was truly enraged by today's matter. Since it involved junior apprentice Sister Peach Blossom, even if he really had a reason, it would be difficult for him to escape punishment. It wasn't easy to clean up the wine cellar, but strictly speaking, his teacher had already let him off lightly. It was better for him to quickly admit it. After all, given his teacher's personality, if he dared to speak any more nonsense, his fate would only be worse. With a snort, the Yardmaster stretched out her hand and clenched it. The furnace trembled for a moment before obediently obeying her. It also knew how to judge a person's performance. The Yardmaster turned around and left. With a step, she shattered the space and disappeared. The EC's birthday banquet incident began to spread in the Sage Dao circle as cultivators from all over returned. As for the rest, only the various tyrants and those who were close to the Sage Dao could vaguely know about it. There were various versions of the rumors. In short, Chinyu of the Peach Blossom Garden had personally slaughtered Shishan Liani, who had stepped into the bitter sea to become a sage. This had happened in front of everyone's eyes, and there was absolutely no falsehood. As a result, Sage Huai had personally descended, and the Yardmaster had followed him, starting a sage war that hadn't happened for many years. Regarding this matter, people of different levels had different concerns. Most of the sages' focus was on the Sage War. The battle between two true Nirvana saints would definitely not end just like that. Although no one knew the outcome of the battle, it wasn't difficult to speculate based on the subsequent developments. The vast sun was like the sea, so the true Nirvana saint was definitely the most terrifying hunter in this sea. The collision between two top hunters would inevitably cause the entire sea to shake, resulting in a series of changes. If one had the intention, this would be an opportunity. But as for what to do, the follow-up reaction had yet to come, so they had to continue to wait. Below the sages, the cultivators of a certain generation in the Sage Dao circle all focused their attention on Chinyu at the same time. This was because in their eyes, this newcomer was simply too eye-catching. He was so valiant that it made people tremble all over. In the current Sage Dao circle, most of the sages had lived for a long time. The only newly advanced sage before Lian, he had already lived for more than 1,000 years. There hadn't been a new sage in 1,000 years. Just when everyone was trying their best to take the lead and become the number one person of the cultivators of a certain generation, Lian Yi, who had just become the number one person and stepped into the bitter sea to become a sage, was killed on the spot in less than a moment of glory. The psychological impact this matter had on them was like a devastating hurricane. Qin Yu's name had been thoroughly imprinted in their hearts, becoming a shining golden label that carried a halo of light. The cultivators who had seen Qin Yu at the East Sea birthday banquet mostly kept their mouths shut when others asked them about him. If they were pressed, they would at most say that he wasn't a good person to talk about. In reality, they just didn't want to embarrass themselves. After all, back in the EC, in their eyes, Qin Yu was a despicable and shameless gigolo. They didn't know what methods he used to deceive the Peach Girl and the Yardmaster's approval. But what happened afterwards undoubtedly showed that although Qin Yu looked like a gigolo, in terms of strength, he was enough to crush all of them. As the rumors spread, in the hearts of the cultivators of a certain generation who had never seen Qin Yu became even more mysterious and unfathomable. As a result, his label shone brighter and brighter, and he even attracted the attention of many beautiful and talented female cultivators in the Sage Circle. This made many of his pursuers extremely annoyed, but they didn't dare to say anything. They could only calm themselves down. Qin Yu already had a Peach Girl. Unless he wanted his head to be torn off by the Yardmaster, he absolutely wouldn't dare to have any other thoughts. Of course, there was another very important reason why Qin Yu was praised by the cultivators of a certain generation, and that was that he had survived in the end. He had killed Sage Scholatry's beloved son, caused Sage Scholatry's wrath to descend upon the East Sea, and in the end, he was still able to escape unscathed. Even without the previous events, just this alone was already impressive enough. Therefore, impressive people were always impressive. There was no need to say anything else. They could just silently give him a thumbs up. Qin Yu's reputation had skyrocketed. In a single day, his name had spread throughout vast Yang City. After a long and sweet sleep, he finally opened his eyes. The light in front of him was soft and gentle, without the least bit of irritation or discomfort. His mind went blank, and he subconsciously narrowed his eyes. Then, he slowly regained his composure. He fiercely stood up and swept his eyes around. After looking around several times, he slowly relaxed his tense body. There was no problem. This was indeed his residence in the Peach Garden. It wasn't just because the interior of the room was the same, but because Qin Yu had already restored his connection with the peach tree in the courtyard. He had returned alive. Feeling the pure joy and excitement coming from the peach tree, Qin Yu's heart warmed. A faint smile lifted the corners of his lips. If one could live a peaceful life, who would be willing to risk their lives, even if these actions would bring about great rewards? For instance, after today, when he walked the world again, besides mentioning his title as a disciple of the Peach Garden, he could also say his own name. This would be enough to deter a great number of people. Cough, cough. Indeed, vanity was an unavoidable emotion in the depths of everyone's heart. He had just woken up and hadn't even done his proper business, but he had already thought of these things. He took a deep breath and suppressed the messy thoughts in his mind. Since he had safely returned to the Peach Garden, Peach Girl must have been rescued. But the connection between the two of them was very vague now. It was faintly discernible, as if it was being isolated by something. It must be the trick of the Yardmaster. As for why she was busy isolating the connection between the two of them, of course, it was so that she could ask him the following questions. If Qin Yu was indeed trustworthy, what awaited him would probably be a reward from the Yardmaster. A true Nirvana saint, the dignified ruler of the Peach Garden Holy Land, must clearly distinguish between rewards and punishments. Qin Yu had saved Peach Girl. Judging from the scale of the pursuit, it was definitely a great merit. What's more, the Yardmaster probably already knew about him killing a saint for the second time. This wasn't Qin Yu boasting. Based on the ability he had displayed, it was natural for him to be valued. Of course, going back to the original topic, Qin Yu needed to be able to withstand the questioning and the test. Otherwise, even if the Yardmaster cut off his connection with Peach Girl first, it was obvious that his fate wouldn't be too good. Fortunately, Qin Yu was already prepared for this. He closed his eyes and thought for a while. When he opened them again, his expression was calm. He got up, washed up, and tidied himself up. Since he was already awake, the Yardmaster would certainly know. If nothing went wrong, she would summon him soon. After a while, there was a knock on the door. "Little junior brother, it's me." Chinyu pushed the door open and came out. He said in a clear voice, "Third senior brother, please come in." The courtyard door opened, and Bai Feng stepped in. Her eyes fell on Chinyu, and a slightly complicated look flashed across her eyes. Her mouth moved, but she only said, "Master wants to see you. Come with me." Chinyu cupped his hands. "Thank you, third senior brother." One in front, one behind, the two of them were silent. Chinyu had something on his mind, and so did Bai Feng. He really wanted to ask if the yardmaster was joking when she said that he would be her son-in-law. However, Bai Feng knew very well what the golden mouth of the Saint Path was. Did she really think that a dignified, true nirvana saint would talk nonsense? But why? Bai Feng couldn't figure it out. Chinyu didn't notice that his third senior brother was distracted at this moment. He was thinking about how to answer the yardmaster's questions. Although he had decided to tell her everything, speaking was a skill. Even if it could only make the yardmaster have a better impression of him, it was completely worth it. It was Bai Feng who broke the silence. "Little junior brother, we're here." Chinyu revealed an apologetic smile. He looked up at the small courtyard in front of him, took a deep breath, and walked forward. He was very clear that from now on, he absolutely couldn't show the slightest bit of hesitation or uneasiness. The Saint Path was heartless. Even if what he said was the truth, the yardmaster might not believe him. Once he was deemed unreliable, his fate would be miserable. Therefore, in fact, the test had already begun from now. With a creaking sound, the courtyard door opened by itself. Chinyu took a look and stepped inside. He stood still and bowed. "Disciple greets master." The yardmaster had her back to the courtyard door and her hands behind her back. "You should know why I summoned you here." Chinyu said respectfully, "Yes." The yardmaster said, "Then say it." Chinyu didn't immediately speak. He paused for a moment and then said, "Disciple comes from a humble background. Because of a chance encounter, I officially stepped onto the path of cultivation. In my early years, I met two women who fell in love with me, and we became Tao companions." He spoke at a moderate pace and spoke about the matters involving Ning Ling and Yu Qi. His words were brief and unavoidable, but he didn't deliberately conceal anything. "In the past, when senior apprentice Sister Peach chased after Shuizhong, I discovered that she was exactly the same as Ning Ling. Besides their different auras, they seemed to be cast from the same mold. Through Shuizhong, Disciple came into contact with the myriad soul path and figured out the relationship between Ning Ling and senior apprentice Sister Peach. Then, I tried to enter the myriad soul path and find a way to break it. But in the end, it was all in vain. When Disciple returned home, Ning Ling and Yu Qi were captured. After investigation, not long after they were captured, they dissipated on their own. Disciple had no other choice but to find a way to enter the Peach Garden and ask Honorable Master and Senior Apprentice Sister to be merciful and give them a chance to live. The Yard Master had her back to Chinyu, and her expression was indifferent. She didn't respond to his words at all. The courtyard fell silent. Chinyu clenched his teeth. Everything Disciple said is true. Although there are some parts where I have lied, I have absolutely no intention of harming Senior Apprentice Sister or the Peach Garden. I ask Honorable Master to investigate this clearly. The Yard Master finally spoke. Since you know what the Myriad Soul Path is, you should understand that your request is to harm Peach Garden. This was the truth. Chinyu took a deep breath. Disciple is willing to make up for it. As long as Honorable Master and Senior Apprentice Sister agree, Disciple is willing to pay any price. The Yard Master lightly said, "Even if it means taking your life?" Chinyu nodded without hesitation. Yes. In the Yard Master's courtyard, there was also a peach tree. It didn't look remarkable. Its branches were crooked, and its leaves were a bit wilted. Standing under the peach tree, the Yard Master's lips twitched. She never thought that someone would make such a stupid choice. If Chinyu hadn't used his actions to prove himself, she wouldn't have believed a single word he said. The Yard Master turned around and glanced at Chinyu. "So, in order to save these two women, you risked your life to save Peach Garden?" Chinyu cupped his hands together. Yes, this was also the truth. In the face of a true saint, it was best not to have any selfish thoughts. If he could answer, he would answer truthfully. Looking down at the ground, Chinyu could feel that the yard master's eyes were now fixed on him. An invisible pressure poured into the air. Like viscous mercury water, it submerged Chinyu completely. Gradually, he found it hard to breathe. Just when he felt that he was suffocating to death, he finally heard the yard master's voice in his ear. "Get up." These 3 words instantly dispelled all the suffocating feeling. Chinyu gasped for breath. After he gasped for a while, and his breathing calmed down a little, the yard master had already walked to the table and sat down. She poured a cup of tea and took a sip. "How does it feel to slaughter a saint twice?" Chinyu smiled bitterly. "I don't dare to deceive honorable master. It's not good at all. If possible, I don't want to encounter it even once." His attitude was still respectful, but his tone was slightly more relaxed. It was because from this point onwards, he could be considered to have passed the test. Of course, this was only a preliminary recognition. He still had to be careful in the future. The yard master nodded. "You are really honest, but slaughtering a saint is slaughtering a saint. To be able to kill Black Shadow, you have already proved your strength and potential." Lightly tapping the table with her fingers, the yard master remained silent. Chinyu's heart sank. He could feel that what he was going to say next would be very important. As time passed, Chinyu gradually felt uneasy. Just as the corner of his mouth twitched and he was about to argue for more, he was interrupted by the yard master with a wave of her hand. "I know what you were going to say." Glancing at Chinyu, she continued, "You want to save your women. I will give you a chance. But whether you can do it or not will depend on yourself." Chinyu was overjoyed. "Thank you, honorable master. I am willing to agree to all your conditions." The yard master waved her hand. "No, you don't understand what I mean. The only one who can save them is you, not me or Peach Maiden." Chinyu said, "Please enlighten me, honorable master." The yard master took a sip, then another, until she finished the tea in the cup. Then, she put down the teacup with a soft paw sound. "There are rumors in the world that Peach Maiden has my Taoist connotation in her. She is a part of my cultivation of the Great Path. Thus, she has received much attention and is pursued by many. But you are different. You have seen the Taoist connotation that I left in Peach Maiden. You should understand that this is not the case." Chinyu nodded. The yard master continued, "I have been aware of this birthday banquet in the East Sea in advance. Thus, I asked you to go with Peach Maiden as a test. I had made thorough arrangements so that Peach Maiden would not be harmed. But unexpectedly, there are too many idiots in this world. One of them is your second senior brother. Thus, I gave you a second chance to kill a saint." He was a little confused. What was the yard master trying to say? Although he was puzzled, Chinyu could only maintain a respectful and attentive state on the surface. The yard master continued, "Her soul has been shattered 3 times, causing problems in her body. Even though she has been sealed by my Taoist connotation, her soul has still begun to disperse. Thus, you have no choice but to link Peach Maiden's life and death with yours, temporarily protecting her." Looking at Chinyu, the yard master said, "Do you understand now?" Chinyu hesitated slightly. "Something happened to senior sister Peach Maiden?" The yard master said, "She is already dead." The air suddenly turned quiet. Chapter 1243. Chinyu frowned and stared at the face in front of him. If it wasn't for the fact that the yard master could crush him with a single finger, she would have grabbed his collar and roared at him. "What are you talking about?" Peach Girl was perfectly fine in front of him. Even though she had been seriously injured, she was fine thanks to the success of the symbiosis method. Chinyu took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. He said in a low voice, "Master, I don't understand what you mean." His tone was respectful, but his eyes revealed a kind of determination. It could be interpreted as, "This matter must be explained clearly." Facing a dignified, true divine giant, he dared to look at her with such disrespectful eyes. He was courting death. It had been a long time since someone had been so presumptuous in front of her. The yard master subconsciously frowned, but then relaxed and said lightly, Peach Girl was congenitally deficient when she was born. Her soul wasn't concentrated, and she wouldn't live for long. Even if I tried my best, I wouldn't be able to protect her. That's why I let Peach Girl cultivate the myriad soul path. The corners of his lips curled up, revealing a look of disdain. This path is simply impossible to walk. I already knew this long ago, but I had no choice. I borrowed the body of the myriad soul path to extend Peach Blossom's life. She looked up at Chinyu. You're very smart. You should have realized that Peach Girl's soul had already dispersed. That's why I said she was dead. The reason why she can still live like a normal person is that my Tao is suppressing her. Moreover, I split off 10,000 souls and used the method of fusing them to replenish her scattered soul, so as to prolong the existence of her soul. Chinyu's breath suddenly deepened. The yard master said, "That's right. You said that the two women who suddenly disappeared were because their original souls had dispersed. Their power was absorbed and returned to their original bodies. Of course, strictly speaking, they didn't disappear. They just fell into a deep sleep and became a part of Peach Girl's soul. If Peach Girl survives in the future, I can naturally find a way to wake them up again. This is my promise to you. But as I said before, whether you can do it or not depends on yourself." Chinyu was silent. Although he didn't fully understand the whole matter, the key clues were very clear. Ning Ling and Yu Qi were indeed the separated souls of Peach Girl. In order to ensure her survival, they had been fused back to her original body. If he wanted to save them, he would have to save Peach first. In other words, if Peach Blossom lived, they would live. If Peach Blossom died, they would disappear with her. Regarding this matter, the yard master had already given him a clear reminder. Chinyu said in a deep voice, "Honorable master, please tell me. As long as there is a sliver of possibility, I will do my best." The yard master said, "Even with my cultivation base, I can't guarantee the safety of the Peach Girl. The only way to save her life is to reverse the flow of time and mend her innate defects." Hearing this, Chinyu's thoughts stirred. He was a bit puzzled. With teacher status, can't he ask the ruler to help? The yard master said, "Reversing the river of time is not a common thing. Even a vast young ruler can't do it lightly. This is because everyone in the world is fighting over it. Do you know that before Shishan Liani, there hasn't been a new Saint Realm cultivator appearing in Haoyang for 1,000 years? Although the divine path is arduous, the current Haoyang has many people with astonishing talent, even surpassing many who have already achieved the divine path. The reason is the word struggle." The yard master muttered to himself for a moment and suddenly flicked his sleeves. The peachwood behind him swayed gently, and an invisible aura descended, isolating them from the outside world. Even with the identity of a true sage, he still had to be so careful in his own training ground. What he was going to say next was definitely top secret. It was indeed so. The yard master spoke slowly, her expression solemn and solemn. Although the vast young world is vast, the capacity of the world is limited. To be more precise, the vast young world itself can only support so many divine paths. Now that the space is almost full, it will be increasingly difficult for the latecomers to achieve the divine path. Unless one can jump out of the vast young world, the container is only so big. If one wants to achieve the divine path, he can only wait. When the world is in chaos and disputes arise, a large number of divine paths will perish, and there will be a new space. Then, a new cycle and replacement will begin. Glancing at Chinyu, the yardmaster said, "Do you find it hard to believe? The divine path is said to be undying and indestructible. Their strength surpasses all living things. But it's the truth. I've already experienced the cycle of reincarnation and replacement 3 times." Although Chinyu's heart was heavy because he suddenly knew the truth about the Peach Girl, he was still shocked when he heard this. As a saint slayer twice, Chinyu was, of course, very clear about the strength and terror of a saint. It was hard for him to imagine what kind of calamity could cause a large number of saints to perish. As if she could see through his thoughts, the yardmaster said, "There aren't too many changes. If you're careful enough and don't die prematurely, there's a high chance that you'll see the fourth cycle of the divine path. So, you don't need to be curious. He stood up with his hands behind his back and walked a few steps under the withered peach tree. He reached out and pinched a leaf. I'm telling you this so that you can be prepared in advance. The world is about to fall into chaos. If you want to survive or save your woman, you have to become stronger as soon as possible. Another reason is to tell you that the divine path needs to be fought over, and sovereigns are no exception. Of course, that level is too high. Even I haven't fully understood it, so I won't explain it to you. Reversing the river of time will consume a great deal of energy, even for sovereigns. They won't agree to it. This will cause sovereigns to fall into a disadvantageous position in the competition at their level. Chinyu felt as if he had comprehended something, but it was a little vague. He subconsciously raised his hand and pinched his forehead. His fingers suddenly froze. The yard master turned around, her expression calm and composed. You're smart indeed. I'm afraid you've already guessed that only a sovereign can save Peach Girl. Since we can't get a sovereign to help us, we can only think of a way to become a sovereign ourselves. Coincidentally, the position of the vast young ruler is currently vacant. Although Qin, you had already guessed it, after hearing the confirmation from the garden master, his mind still buzzed. A sovereign. A sovereign. He had personally experienced the strength of the divine path, and the yard master was standing right in front of him. It could be said that she was at the peak of Haoyang, and with a single thought, all things would wither. However, Qin knew very well that if the yard master wanted to kill him, she would only need to lift a finger. Then what about the Tao of killing saints? Even if the true saint of the Permitha continent wasn't so simple, it wouldn't be too difficult for him. Light and darkness is one, space and time added to the body. Qin was well aware that his aptitude was among the best in vast Yang. He had once thought that there would be a day when he could reach the other shore like the yardmaster. But sovereigns, he really hadn't thought about it. But today, the yardmaster had exposed the problem in a calm tone, throwing it directly in front of him. If he wanted to save his woman, he would have to save Peach first. And if he wanted to save Peach, he would have to break through to the ruler realm. Qin suddenly felt that the small goal he had set in the beginning had really become a small goal. Compared to the yardmaster's expectations, it was not worth mentioning at all. He swallowed hard and looked at the yardmaster Qin. Master, you have reached the peak of the Saint Path, and you are only one step away from the ruler realm. The yardmaster shook her head. I have taken the wrong path. Reaching my current realm is already my limit, and it is impossible for me to advance any further. Perhaps she felt that she had given Qin too much pressure all of a sudden, and that she might have scared him silly. After a short pause, the yardmaster continued, strictly speaking, you are the fourth person I have chosen. Your eldest senior brother, second senior brother, and seventh senior sister all have the same hopes of becoming a ruler. But they don't know about Peach. Do you understand what I mean? Qin bowed. Master, rest assured, I will not say a word about senior sister Peach to anyone. The yardmaster made no comment and took a few steps forward. If it weren't for White Phoenix's background, she would also have a high chance. But now, she is at most half a ruler. Therefore, there are 4.5 people in the Peach Garden who are on the path to the ruler realm. You don't need to feel too much pressure. You just need to work hard in your cultivation. Suddenly, he had 3.5 more companions. It was indeed easier for him to accept this. But on second thought, his eldest senior brother and the others didn't know about this at all. How could the pressure be the same? He had almost been fooled by her. The yardmaster coughed. That's how it is. If you accept, I'll try my best to help you. As for whether he would accept, the yardmaster didn't say, but Qin knew it clearly. She had already told him about such a confidential and important matter. How could he refuse at the last moment? If you don't agree, let's see if the yardmaster can pull off your head with 2 fingers. Moreover, Qin had no reason to refuse. He took a deep breath and bowed. Disciple is willing to give a try. If there is such a day in the future, I will definitely rescue Senior Sister Peach. If I disobey, I will be despised by vast Yang, and I will never have the chance to become a ruler. This oath was vicious enough, and it was just right. The yardmaster's eyes softened a little. She flipped her hand and took out a black pill. It was pungent and pungent. "Eat this." Chinyu didn't hesitate. He took the pill with both hands and swallowed it. His straightforward and efficient action earned a hint of praise from the yardmaster. "Very good. Now you're one of us." As she spoke, she raised her hand and patted Chinyu's shoulder. "Sit down and talk. Standing is too tiring." Chinyu was speechless. After eating the pill, he became one of us. Even the tone of his voice changed. "Yardmaster, can you not be so realistic?" He complained silently in his heart. He coughed and sat down on half a stool opposite the yardmaster. The yardmaster waved her hand. The branches of the peach tree swayed gently, and the invisible seal was dispelled. Then she poured a cup of tea and placed it on the table. "Chinyu, there's one more thing. From today onwards, you're the son-in-law of the peach garden." Chinyu, who had just taken a sip of tea, picked up the teacup respectfully and almost spat it out. He wiped the corner of his mouth in embarrassment and stared at the yardmaster with wide eyes. The yardmaster was drinking tea calmly. "You didn't hear me wrong. If you're still worried, I can say it again." In fact, the yardmaster had already said something similar back in the EC. But at that time, it couldn't be taken seriously at all. Everyone knew that it was to deal with Sage Huai's excuse. But why did it turn out like this now? Chinyu put down the teacup and thought about what to say in his heart. But before he could open his mouth, he was choked back. "I need a reason." The yardmaster put down the teacup. "Your aptitude is very good and worthy of my nurturing. But there's a limit to this kind of nurturing. If you exceed it, you'll be noticed. Don't doubt the ability of a person at the peak of the Saint Path to attract attention and scrutiny in the vast young world. If you want to succeed, you have to be given a suitable identity. Peach Girl's Taoist companion is obviously the most suitable. Moreover, most parties in the vast young world have already tacitly agreed on this point. You won't be suspected." Chapter 1244. Seeing Chinyu hesitating to speak, the yardmaster said lightly, "This identity not only allows me to help you freely, but it also provides you with a great degree of protection. I dote on Peach Maiden, and anyone who wants to touch you will have to be careful. Of course, this identity is only a title. I will announce to the public that Peach Maiden will go into seclusion to recuperate from her injuries. Only after she is fully recovered will she officially marry you." She paused and looked at Chinyu with a profound expression. "However, if you are willing to give up, the identities of the two women I mentioned before will be true." Chinyu hurriedly stood up. "Disciple is stupid. I don't dare to covet senior apprentice Sister Peach Maiden." His attitude had to be clear and resolute. He did not wish to transmit any information that was not right to the yardmaster, which would lead to an irreversible outcome. Chinyu looked up and met the yardmaster's eyes. "I will listen to honorable master's arrangements, but please remember the promise you made to me today." The yardmaster looked calm. "Okay." The courtyard door opened by itself. "Go and see Peach Maiden. She knows my arrangements." Chinyu respectfully nodded. He stood up and took several steps back, quickly leaving the small courtyard. Creak! The courtyard door closed by itself. The yardmaster looked up at the peach tree in the courtyard. "I didn't tell you the truth, but at least there is a chance." She paused and said, "I know what I am doing. There won't be any accidents." She paused again and raised her eyebrows. "Of course, I have always been confident in my judgment." This time, there was a long silence. It seemed that someone had said a lot. The yard master hesitated for a moment, but it immediately turned into determination. "I don't have much time." No one spoke again. The yard master and the peach tree remained silent in the silence. Peach Maiden was sober. After Chinyu pushed open the door, he saw her eyes. Very cold and very indifferent. It was like a statue that was alive but cold, without the slightest bit of warmth. Being shrouded by her eyes, Chinyu's heart skipped a beat. Then there was a trace of sorrow. As the yardmaster's daughter, she was recognized by Vast Yang as a top fair and rich beauty. Countless talented cultivators chased after her. But who knew what kind of situation she was in? In order to live to this day, how much pain and suffering had she endured? She had endured incomparably difficult trials and tribulations. Looking at the face in front of him that was completely the same as Ning Ling's, Qin Yu didn't feel any resentment in his heart. On the contrary, strictly speaking, he should be grateful. Now, because of Peach Maiden, Ning Ling and Yu Qi had fallen into a life and death situation with her, and it was extremely difficult to rescue them. But if it weren't for Peach, Ning Ling and Yu Qi wouldn't have existed in this world. He took a deep breath and exhaled. This was fate. Since it was destined to be like this, he could only give it his all. Qin Yu smiled. Senior apprentice, Sister Peach Maiden, I came to see you. This smile came from the bottom of his heart. A ripple appeared in Peach Girl's eyes. You don't blame me? Qin Yu shook his head. Senior apprentice sister, there's no need to think too much about this. I have already promised Honorable Master that I will do my best. There might still be a chance. At this point, he raised his hand and rubbed his nose. I won't hide it from Senior Apprentice Sister. My luck has always been good. In the eyes of many, I'm already heaven-defying. Although I've never considered becoming a sovereign, it's not too late to start thinking about it now. Peach Girl said, don't mention it casually in the future. Qin Yu knew what she was referring to. He cupped his hands together and said, thank you for the reminder, Senior Apprentice Sister. Peach Girl was silent for a moment. I already know their request. If possible, I will return their freedom. His heart settled. Although the Garden Master had already given Qin Yu an official response, he didn't dare to fully believe her when facing the ruthless Great Dao. Thank you, Senior Apprentice Sister. Peach Girl closed her eyes. Qin Yu didn't say anything more. He bowed once more and left. The door opened and closed. After several breaths of time, Peach Girl opened her eyes. She looked at the closed door, her eyes empty. It was unknown what she was thinking about. Third Senior Apprentice brother had gone into seclusion. After Qin Yu learned the news, he felt a bit guilty. But he couldn't explain too much about this matter. He could only secretly apologize. The other disciples of the Peach Garden all had different reactions when they heard the news. Lei Xiaoyu was the first to arrive. She grabbed Qin Yu and asked, is it true? After obtaining a positive reply, her eyes darkened a bit. Then, she looked around and lowered her voice. Are you there? Seeing Qin Yu shake his head, she was emboldened. She gave him a thumbs up and said, Big brother Qin, you are so fierce. You even dared to touch Senior Apprentice Sister Peach. As she spoke, she gave Qin Yu a look that told him to pray for his own luck in the future. Then, she teased him a few more times before hurrying away. The second to arrive was unexpectedly his second Senior Apprentice brother, whom he had never met before. Qin Yu knew that he was the most eye-catching person in the Peach Garden right now. Thus, he used the excuse of recuperating from his injuries to shut himself in. There was a knock on the door, and the rich smell of alcohol rushed out. The servants serving Qin Yu all fell to the ground with loud plopping sounds. Qin Yu also fainted. If it weren't for the fact that the peach trees in the courtyard didn't respond, he would have worried that some infatuated lover of Peach Girl had come to seek revenge. He opened the door. The fragrance of wine was even thicker. Qin Yu held his breath, but it was useless. This wine fragrance was like a living creature. It followed him and drilled into his pores. The person in front of him had a look of guilt and self-blame. I heard that after little Junior Apprentice brother returned, he went into seclusion to recuperate from his injuries. This was all my fault. I was schemed against by others and arrived late. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been so many things that happened afterwards. With just a few words, Qin Yu knew who this person was. He was the infamous second Senior Apprentice brother who loved to fight in the Holy Dao Circle. Of course, in the mouths of outsiders, especially those who were enemies of the Peach Garden, he also had a resounding nickname, Mad Dog Second. Qin Yu cupped his hands together and bowed. Greetings, second Senior Apprentice brother. In truth, he was a bit surprised. He never thought that the second son of the Peach Garden, who had the nickname of Mad Dog Second, would have such a refined and elegant appearance. This person had changed his clothes and was holding a book in his hands. He looked just like an elegant young master from a scholarly family. His appearance was excellent. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was as gentle as jade. Indeed, there weren't many cultivators in the peach garden that could be judged with common sense. Second senior apprentice brother reached out a hand to support him. With a light cracking sound, Yu stiffened. His bones were most likely broken. He looked up and saw that his second senior apprentice brother was also panicking. With just a glance, Yu eliminated all thoughts that he was helping White Phoenix vent her anger. Junior apprentice brother, are you all right? I'm really sorry. Teacher recently punished me to enter the wine cellar, and I've been cleaning up the beasts inside. I wasn't able to calm down for a moment. I'm really sorry. Second senior apprentice brother felt a cold sweat drip down his forehead. He had heard about the arrangements his master had made for junior apprentice Sister Peach Maiden. Although he was a bit surprised, he didn't feel anything else. He originally wanted to wait until he finished cleaning up the wine cellar before coming back to apologize to his junior apprentice brother. But after hearing the news, he couldn't sit still. He desperately rushed over to grab a jar of wine. But he never thought that as soon as they met, his junior apprentice brother's bones would be broken. He heard that junior apprentice Sister Peach Maiden was worried about their junior apprentice brother. Would she be angry? If junior apprentice Sister Peach Maiden was angry, then his master would definitely be unhappy. He couldn't stay here for long. His thoughts raced. He left behind a jar of wine and said that he would come back to apologize to his junior apprentice brother in the future. Then, he ran away like a gust of wind. That's right, he ran away. What elegant demeanor. What gentle as jade. His back was full of panic. Yu's heart was in a mess. With a wry smile, he moved his arms. Although the broken bones had healed, they still felt a little sore and numb. Second senior apprentice brother was indeed a fierce man who fought every day and provoked countless strong enemies. But he was still alive and kicking until today. His strength couldn't be described with just the word tyrannical. Yu thought that his bones were quite hard, but he had broken them with a casual pinch. No wonder the garden master had arranged for second senior apprentice brother to pick up Peach Maiden. Although they had only met for a short time, Yu felt that if the Black Shadow Semi-Sage had fallen into his second senior apprentice brother's hands, he wouldn't have had an easy time. If second senior apprentice brother was already so strong, what about eldest senior apprentice brother, who spent most of his time in seclusion? It was a pity that he didn't get to see his battle with Nine-Headed in the EC. It must have been a splendid battle. Yu felt the pressure again. Although he had light and darkness as one, and he had time and space, he could tell that eldest senior apprentice brother and a second senior apprentice brother of the Peach Garden were so ridiculously strong. He didn't need to think to know that they must have hidden cards. They couldn't compare to him? Probably not. Moreover, there was a huge gap in strength between them. How could he compete with them for the vacant dominator position? Not to mention that this was only the Peach Garden. How many strong cultivators like eldest senior apprentice brother and second senior apprentice brother were there in Haoyang? It was hard to say if there were more, but there must be some. Yu smiled bitterly to himself. He suddenly felt that the garden master actually thought highly of him. In fact, there were some things that no one knew except for the garden master. Otherwise, Yu would have realized that the garden master didn't just think highly of him. She simply had high hopes for him. That day, after leaving the place where the second saint was slaughtered and bringing Peach Maiden and Yu back to the Peach Garden, the garden master directly turned back. Her action completely frightened a certain big guy who had returned. It was a trivial matter for him to turn around and run away, so there was no need to talk about it. Next, the garden master personally cleaned up all the traces that Yu had left in this world. Of course, her method was very simple and crude. It was similar to what the Black Shadow Semi-Sage had done. However, the garden master's press was obviously not something that the Black Shadow Semi-Sage could compare to. As the saying went, one palm could overturn heaven and earth and move mountains and rivers. That was probably the case. It was precisely because of this that the big guy was scared out of his wits and fled without a trace. He no longer dared to think about returning home. Terrifying. Too terrifying. Comprehending light and darkness. Mastering space and time. Even the garden master would find it hard to believe if she hadn't personally experienced it and confirmed it. If she had discovered Qin Yu's aptitude 10,000 years ago, she would have attacked without hesitation. She would have used a secret technique to seize his body and kill him. She would have seized this aptitude to help her reconstruct her great path and then break through to the Dominator realm. However, it was too late now. Qin Yu couldn't be killed. That was why there was a later test. Qin Yu obtained the Garden Master's approval and became the son-in-law of the Peach Garden. Status? Reason? Title? Was it necessary? Perhaps it was necessary, but it was certainly not important. Did he really think that the identity of the Peach Garden's son-in-law could be taken by just anyone? Qin Yu was chosen by the Garden Master to be Peach Maiden's guardian. He would protect the entire Peach Garden and ensure that no harm would befall her. Chapter 1245. The Peach Garden officially announced that Peach Girl of the 4th rank and Qin Yu of the 9th rank fell in love with each other and would become Dao companions. Although the date of the ceremony had not been set, the news was like a boulder that stirred up waves. Their focus was still different. The sages thought that the newly promoted Saint Slayer Qin Yu's aptitude was indeed amazing. He was recognized by the Yard Master and married to Peach Girl. After making this decision, the Yard Master was probably going to train Qin Yu as her future successor. However, they couldn't understand why the true Nirvana Saint would make such a decision in a hurry. After all, Qin Yu had just made a name for himself and had only been in the Peach Garden for a short time. Wasn't he afraid that there would be problems? The Yard Master was not someone who would be careless and easily tricked. On the other hand, the cultivators felt sour, but most of them were impressed. They thought to themselves that such an awesome person was indeed beyond their imagination. That was Peach Girl. Hao Yang was the top beauty and the talented cultivators who pursued her. The sum of them could fill up the entire East Sea, but they had never heard of anyone who could get close to her. Qin Yu had only been in the Peach Garden for a short time, but he had already captured Peach Girl's heart. From then on, he rose to the heavens in a single step. His status was so precious that few could compare with him in the entire Sage Dao circle. On this day, the East Sea Dragon Sage smashed his cup and cursed in the Dragon Palace. The son-in-law he had chosen had been snatched away by that shameless Peach Girl. Dragon Girl locked herself in her room and wrote the words, "Forever lost my love," with a sorrowful expression as she wept silently. As for revenge, forget it. Even if I lost love, I still have my life. I can't make it difficult for me to live. Qin Yu, who was the center of the conversation, knew nothing about all this. But he was not stupid. He could guess it just by thinking about it. Including the Saint Slayer incident, he was really famous this time. But at the same time, there must be many people who wanted to kill him. For example, Peach Girl's numerous suitors. And of course, West Mountain. Peach Girl didn't die, which was Qin Yu's biggest mistake. Qin Yu didn't know and didn't care what would happen between the Scholar Sage and the Yard Master. But he was clear that if there was a chance, the Scholar Sage would not hesitate to crush him into pieces. The thought of being targeted by a true Nirvana Saint who could go head-to-head with the Yard Master sent chills down his spine. Fortunately, now that he had become a member of the 4.5-man team in the Peach Garden, he believed that the Garden Master would do her best to ensure his safety. Eldest senior brother went into seclusion and asked Tai Shan to deliver a congratulatory gift. 6th senior brother Tu Xing came with Tai Shan, and they were inseparable as usual. After presenting their gifts, the 2 senior brothers did not stay for long. After saying a few meaningless greetings, such as little junior brother needs to recuperate well, they took their leave at the same time. Qin Yu thought it was a bit strange. His 2 senior apprentice brothers were acting very cautious. But before he could think further, 7th senior apprentice sister arrived. Behind him was Lei Xiaoyu, who had her head lowered and her eyes drooped in fear. It seemed like these people in the Peach Garden had arranged a visit today. Greetings, 7th senior apprentice sister, 8th senior apprentice sister. Qin Yu coughed and bowed. Lei Xiaoyu had an uncomfortable expression. As expected, 7th senior apprentice sister had changed into a beautiful and alluring face. Her figure was enchanting and alluring, and she smiled. Little junior apprentice brother, I take back what I said before. In the future, I will have to rely on you to protect me in this peach garden. As she finished speaking, she winked at Chinyu. Chinyu forced a smile. Seventh senior apprentice sister is too serious. I will have to rely on you in the future. The garden master was certainly the clearest about the people in the peach garden. Since she placed seventh senior apprentice sister on the same level as eldest senior apprentice brother and second senior apprentice brother, then she must be extremely strong. Towards such an unfathomable senior apprentice sister who changed faces every day, he didn't dare to provoke her in the slightest. Seventh senior apprentice sister smiled again and again. Little junior apprentice brother really knows how to talk. I like you like this. This was not easy to respond to. Lei Xiaoyu helped Chinyu out of this awkward situation. She earnestly said, Little junior apprentice brother, in the future when you are with senior apprentice sister Peach Maiden, you must cultivate hard and live a good life. Chinyu felt that there was a hidden meaning in this girl's words. Seventh senior apprentice sister glanced at Lei Xiaoyu, the smile on her face even wider. Of the 9 disciples of Peach Blossom Garden, besides the 2 involved parties, only third senior apprentice brother White Phoenix didn't say anything. Seventh senior apprentice sister's eyes flashed. She suddenly said, Third senior apprentice brother has gone into seclusion. He might be able to make a breakthrough in his bottleneck. I hope that little junior apprentice brother doesn't mind. Chinyu smiled and nodded. If third senior apprentice brother can smoothly make a breakthrough, that would be for the best. I would be overjoyed. So how could I be so petty? Seventh senior apprentice sister looked at Chinyu several times and nodded. I knew that my little junior apprentice brother was a sensible person. All right, that's all for today. I have other matters to attend to, so I'll be leaving first. She turned her head and said, 80, come with big sister. Lei Xiaoyu was 100 times unwilling. She had a bitter expression on her face, but she didn't dare to say anything to refuse her. He glanced at Chinyu, but after being ignored, he gnashed his teeth and gloomily nodded and left. Closing the courtyard doors, Chinyu lightly humphed. He thought that this little girl was quite bold. She actually dared to tease him. Although he didn't know why seventh senior apprentice sister had pulled Lei Xiaoyu over, he knew that there wouldn't be any danger. At most she would suffer a bit. This would be a small lesson to her. After the disciples of the Peach Garden arrived, it was time for the cultivators of the Peach Garden to come from all directions. Since the Garden Master had announced the good news, they naturally had to express their gratitude, and they had to express it in a big way. Everyone here was smart. The Garden Master only had a single daughter, and she had always treated her like a treasure. How could they not understand why she had promised her to Mr. Knife? This was the same as choosing a future for the Peach Garden. Then what else was there to say? They hurried to give gifts to curry favor, and they had to be generous gifts in order to leave a good impression in Mr. Knight's heart. According to the Garden Master's wishes, Chinyu had to personally entertain this group of people while Peach Blossom was recuperating, and at the same time, familiarize himself with them. He was all smiles for a long time, but his face felt stiff. It was fine if there were harvests, but all the treasures that had piled up into a mountain had all been sent into the Peach Garden storehouse. The Garden Master had said that these were gifts to congratulate him, and that they could only be given to him after the wedding. Chinyu bitterly smiled. Like how I'll believe you. You rotten old man, you're so evil. How can you spit out what you've already eaten? Besides, everyone knew that it was a problem whether or not he would show up on the day of the wedding. Even if he did show up, it would just be a pretense. The treasures flowed through his hands like flowing water, and then disappeared without a trace. This was simply torture. Chinyu felt that it was too difficult for him. Fortunately, this situation did not last for too long. Chinyu received a summon from the Garden Master, and once again came to the small courtyard where the Garden Master lived. Greetings, Honorable Master. The Garden Master was drinking tea. She glanced at him. You've been cursing me in your heart for the past few days, haven't you? Chinyu's forehead instantly broke out in a cold sweat. Did the Saint Path have such an ability? He even said that the Garden Master had cultivated a method similar to his mind-reading skill. This disciple is terrified. This disciple wouldn't dare. Nonsense. As long as he was not caught on the spot, he would definitely not admit to it. No, even if he was caught, he would have to pretend that he had lost his mind or something and deny it. The garden master snorted. If you really want to marry Peach Blossom, I'll give you the treasures immediately. I'll also give you access to the storehouse. You can kill and take whatever you want. Chinyu lowered his head and said nothing. The yard master secretly scolded Meng Qi for not taking the bait, but there would be plenty of time in the future. She was not in a hurry. She put down the teacup and said, I called you here today to confirm your cultivation path so that I can prepare you in advance. Chinyu bowed. Thank you, honorable master. The garden master said, cut the crap. You're still in the divine realm. Summon your divine seal. I'll help you fix it and ensure that you can break through to the original God realm as soon as possible. There was a hint of disdain on her face. The divine realm. This realm was too low. Although his strength was not weak, it was still shameful to say it out loud. As the dignified son-in-law of the Peach Blossom Garden, how could he only be in the divine realm? He should at least be at the original God realm. Of course, the most important reason was that only those who had reached the original God realm were qualified to search for that sea. After all, he could not even find the sea. How could he set a goal to break through to the sovereign realm? If not, the garden master actually did not want her to interfere with Chinyu's cultivation too much. He had taken the wrong path and was trapped at the peak of the saint realm. The great path ahead of him had been cut off, and he could not turn back. He was destined to stop here for the rest of his life. Those who had taken the wrong path were not qualified to guide someone who had set his goal to become a sovereign. Cough, cough. Moreover, the cost of this matter was too great. Even if it was a true saint of the other shore, it was not easy to forcefully fix the flaws of another cultivator's divine seal. If the target was not Chinyu and this boy was too important, the garden master would not have helped him. That was why he was in a bad mood today. It should be known that he, the dignified master of the Peach Blossom Spring, had never suffered a loss for anyone in his life except for his own daughter. Chinyu felt that ever since the garden master had taken the mysterious pill, she had become a different person. She was much more real and had lost her image. She was a true saint. She should at least maintain her identity and not be too direct. Moreover, it was just a pill. Was she really that confident in its effect? As he silently ridiculed her, his mind moved. The divine seal suddenly condensed and floated above his head. He bowed. Honorable master, please guide me. In the past, in order to smoothly enter the myriad soul path, Chinyu had obtained the divine concentration seal from the stone pagoda and forcefully condensed it into the divine path. Although the process was tortuous, the final result could be considered good. Chinyu had smoothly stepped into the divine realm, and there was nothing wrong with him afterwards. However, this divine seal was not a natural product. Chinyu was uncertain, but he still saw this as the best opportunity. The garden master was a dignified, true saint of the other shore. Her vision was high and her methods were exquisite. It was not something he could imagine. If there was really a problem with the divine seal, the garden master would definitely be able to discover it. She would then help him eliminate the hidden dangers ahead of time and solidify his foundation for breaking into the original God realm. Time passed slowly. Chinyu waited and waited, but the garden master's voice didn't come. He couldn't help but frown inwardly. He was a little flustered. Was the problem very serious? Nonsense. If it wasn't very complicated and thorny, why would a dignified, true saint remain silent for so long? That damn stone pagoda. I knew it was unreliable. This kind of thing that came to me on its own and shamelessly took the initiative to be its master was really unreliable. In the dark nothingness, a certain stone pagoda burst into tears as it sensed Chinyu's thoughts. It thought, have you forgotten who forced me to obtain the divine seal, self-condensation seal? Moreover, do you know the level of your divine seal? Have you ever asked me about it since then? Without any investigation or verification, you labeled me as unreliable. I feel so bitter in my heart. But at this time, no matter how bitter it was, it could only endure it. The garden master was investigating the divine seal, and it had no choice but to run into her hands. But Chinyu, I'll remember this. When I have the chance to make a comeback, I'll definitely make you pay 100-fold. Ah! There was no movement. There was still no movement. Chinyu took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and raised his head with difficulty. Then he saw the incomparably gloomy face of the garden master. Chinyu's divine seal was reflected in her eyes. Countless incomparably complex nomological marks were intertwined with each other, and there were also thousands of lines that hung down like curtains. They shone brightly and dazzlingly. It was hard to say anything else, but judging from its appearance, this divine seal was really not bad. Chapter 1246. However, for a divine seal, appearance was not the most important thing. The key was its practicality. Seeing the yard master staring at the divine seal with a solemn expression, Chinyu's heart became heavier. He asked cautiously, "Master, is there a big problem?" The yard master blinked and looked down. "This divine seal of yours, how did you get it?" Sure enough, there was a problem. With the yard master's experience, she instantly discovered that something was wrong. The stone tower. Forget it. Let's not talk about it first. If there really was a problem, it would be useless to demolish it now. Chinyu took a deep breath. In my early years, I hurriedly broke through to the divine realm in order to enter the myriad soul path. However, the condensation of the divine seal was not smooth, so I had to interfere on my own. The yard master's eyes moved. "You mean this divine seal was condensed by you?" Chinyu nodded. "And it was done in a hurry?" Chinyu nodded again. "How long did it take?" Chinyu blinked. The yard master was expressionless. "Let me ask you, how long did it take you to condense this divine seal?" 7 days. The yard master fell silent. Chinyu licked the corner of his mouth. "Master, no matter what the problem is, just tell me the truth. I can bear it." Looking at the boy's face of death, the corner of the yard master's mouth twitched. She was sure that he really didn't know and didn't want to make fun of her. He knew that this lad was too cunning. There was no way he would do something so unreliable and courting death by playing with fire. In other words, it was all luck. As an old fellow who had already lived through 3 cycles of the replacement of the divine path, the term experienced and knowledgeable was certainly the most appropriate to describe the yardmaster. The yardmaster certainly knew about the divine concentration seal, which had been popular for a period of time many years ago. Not only did she know about it, but she also collected many secret techniques of the divine concentration seal in order to verify it and find some inspiration to break through the limits of cultivation. After careful study, she found that this thing sounded very lofty. It seemed that a long time ago there was a slogan, "My fate is in my own hands, not in the hands of the heavens," which made the blood of a group of cultivators boil. However, 99% of those who shouted this phrase back then became dregs. They weren't killed by others, but killed themselves. After ascertaining that the level of danger was too high and the success rate was frighteningly low, it was basically playing with fire and getting burned, the yard master decisively stopped. However, saints were extraordinary after all. They had studied it for a period of time and could be said to be experts in the spirit concentration seal. That was why he was lost in thought for a long time as he stared at this divine seal that contained profound laws and profound mysteries. In just 7 days, and he was still a novice, he managed to condense this divine seal in such a hurry. If she wasn't certain that Chinyu wouldn't dare to lie to her and that the divine seal was right in front of her, the yard master would definitely strangle the person who said this to her. Daring to use such stupid words to fool a true Nirvana saint, he must be tired of living. Chinyu waited for a while. In the end, it was the yard master who came. The look in her eyes became more and more complicated, and there was something strange between her brows. This made him more and more uneasy. "Master," the yard master waved her hand and said, "Put away the divine seal." Is there no hope? Chinyu's heart was heavy, but he also didn't believe this. He was clearly doing well. Moreover, the old tortoise at the peak of the death-fearing domain was still here. If there was really a problem with Chinyu's divine seal, he would definitely tell her. He wouldn't have in the past, but now that they were in the same boat, this guy definitely wouldn't dare to hide it. This doesn't seem right. After putting away the divine seal, Qin Yu's mind was in a mess. He looked at the yardmaster in front of him and his mouth moved, but he didn't know what to say. The only thing he was thinking about was that if there was a problem with his divine seal, would the yardmaster still treat him as a member of the 4.5 people team? If he was kicked out, would he be in danger? After all, Qin Yu knew too many things now. Everything was fine, but how did things suddenly come to this stage? Could it be that the twice saint slaying was too arrogant and was finally getting his retribution? The yardmaster took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. Although it was a little unbelievable, it was ultimately good news. He had outstanding aptitude, was hardworking, and had a bright future. But the yardmaster had seen too many examples of people who lost their lives when they went out and died prematurely. Therefore, luck couldn't be ignored either. Qin Yu's foundation was unquestionable. Now that she looked at it carefully, his luck was also excellent, and his future was promising. But why do I still feel a little indignant? Am I envious? Humph, how is that possible? I'm a true Nirvana saint, one step away from becoming a ruler. I only need one finger to crush Qin Yu to death. How can I be envious of him? What a joke. But the yardmaster's expression became increasingly ugly because she couldn't deceive herself. The more he vehemently denied it, the more it proved something. Because she was really indignant. Why? Even as a true saint, I don't dare to try the self-condensing divine seal. But Qin Yu succeeded so easily. Not only did he succeed, but he was extremely successful, so successful that it was unbelievable. He took the endless galaxy and strung it into a curtain of beads. The reason why legends were called legends was that basically no one had seen it with their own eyes. But today a legend had been verified. As someone who had personally experienced it, the Yardmaster was still able to remain so calm. She was definitely shrewd and deep. Steady, steady. As a true saint, how could she be so easily shocked by her own disciple? Even if she was really shocked, she couldn't show it in the slightest. Otherwise, how would she lead the team in the future? How would she maintain the dignity of the saint path and the master path? The Yardmaster coughed softly. Don't show your divine seal to others easily in the future. Don't ask for the reason. Just do as I say. She didn't want to explain, at least not today. I'm a true saint, so I'll be willful. Qin Yu relaxed. Although it was only one round, the situation seemed to be a little different from what he had imagined. Does this mean it's okay? He looked at the Yardmaster without saying anything, but his eyes had already fully revealed his attitude. The Yardmaster's chest tumbled, and she snorted coldly. It's okay. Your divine seal is very good, but it's different from what I imagined. She paused for a moment, and finally couldn't help but say with a sigh, the true divinity path. There are indeed few people in the vast young world who dare to walk this path. Qin Yu blinked. Master, what is the true divinity path? The Yardmaster almost had a mental breakdown. You've even condensed the galaxy divine seal, and you're asking me, what is the true divinity path? Boy, there should be a limit to your jokes. That's not right. She suddenly remembered that Qin Yu was born in a low-level world. In addition, the time he had spent in this world was too short, so it was normal that he didn't know many things about the Saint Dao Circle. I've obviously figured it out, but why do I feel even more depressed? Steady, steady, I have to steady my aura. As a true saint, I have to be magnanimous and have a heart that can accommodate mountains. It's just a small matter, and it's not worth getting angry over. It's just a true divinity path, and it's not like I haven't seen it before. Moreover, the more powerful this boy Qin Yu is, the more likely it is that my daughter will be saved. Similarly, from the side, it proves that his judgment of people is as awesome as ever, and he has never made a mistake. The Yardmaster calmly took another breath and said, Previously, you said that it wasn't smooth for you to condense the divine seal, so you interfered with it by self-condensing. You probably know the reason why it wasn't smooth, right? Qin Yu nodded. Yes, before I broke through to the divine realm, I comprehended too many rules, so I couldn't condense the divine seal completely. For a normal cultivator, Comprehending 9 rules of heaven and earth before reaching the divine realm is already the limit. Condensing a divine seal with 9 rules is already considered amazing. Among them, those who are lucky or have outstanding natural endowments, or can condense 10 rules of the divine seal. The Yardmaster glanced at Chinyu. Calculate. How many rules did you use when you condensed the divine seal? Chinyu was speechless. He didn't count. The key was counting, and he definitely couldn't count clearly. But one thing was certain, it was definitely more than 10. The Yardmaster's voice was calm. Cultivators of the divine path can continue to comprehend the rules of heaven and earth, using the divine seal as the core, and continue to merge with it until they reach a certain limit and condense the divine source. Then, they can advance to the original God realm. But you're different. The divine seal condensed by the rules of heaven and earth exceeds the limit will not be able to merge with new rules, but will exist in parallel. To put it simply, even if you comprehend more rules of heaven and earth and merge them into the divine seal, your power will be enhanced, but you will never be able to condense the divine source, and you can't step into the original God realm. Qin Yu's eyes widened, thinking that the Yardmaster was joking, right? How could this not be a problem? The true God path, what the hell? If he couldn't even step into the original God realm, he couldn't find the sea of bitterness, and he had no hope of reaching the divine path. You can't even reach the divine path, and you still want to go one step further and attack the vacant position of the ruler? Hurry up and wash up and sleep. Reality is too cruel, and everything can happen in dreams. Qin Yu's voice was dry. This matter was too serious. It not only involved his future cultivation, but also concerned the life and death of Ning Ling and Yu Qi. A crippled disciple who couldn't even reach the original God realm was certainly of no use. How could he expect a divine path to keep his word? It was already good enough that he didn't kill him. Master, help me. The corner of the Yardmaster's eyes twitched. She lowered her voice and roared. You probably didn't hear me clearly. I said that although I can't reach the original God realm, my strength can be enhanced. Qin Yu thought about it. There seemed to be such a sentence. The Yardmaster sneered. If you were really crippled, would I still be in the mood to talk nonsense with you? You're very smart, boy. Don't play dumb in front of me. He took a deep breath and told himself to maintain his demeanor. The true God path is not easy, but now it seems that it might be a lucky choice. After all, the ruler position has been vacant for a long time. There's so many people who walk the right path, but none of them see hope. Perhaps there will be more opportunities if we take another path. Qin Yu coughed lightly and laughed dryly. I did have some speculations, but Master, you didn't give me a definite answer, so I'm worried. In other words, I don't have any problems. Instead, I have a little advantage. The Galaxy Divine Seal, the true God path. In addition to light and dark, space-time. When all of these were superimposed together, could this be called a little advantage? If this was called a little advantage, how could others live? The Yardmaster immediately decided that she couldn't let Qin Yu continue to stay here today. Otherwise, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to control herself and ruin her image. After all, even in the past, her foundation as a true saint was far inferior to hers. She waved her hand. Before Qin Yu could react, his vision blurred, and he appeared outside the courtyard. The Yardmaster's muffled voice sounded. I need to make some considerations about your future cultivation. You can go back first. More or less aware of the change in the Yardmaster's mood, Qin Yu bowed and turned to leave. A sharp light flashed in his eyes. It seemed that not only was there no problem with the divine seal he had condensed, but it was also very good. There was also the true God path. He had to investigate it when he got back and figure out what was going on. It was time to make up for his shortcomings in basic common sense. This thought had crossed his mind more than once, but Qin Yu was too pressed for time. He basically didn't have much free time. Moreover, the speed of his progress was too frightening. Often, before he could figure out what was going on, he had already improved a step further. Sure enough, growing too fast was also a kind of trouble, and this kind of trouble had accompanied him for many years. What should I do? I'm waiting online, very anxious. If the yardmaster had really cultivated a method similar to his mind-reading ability, she might not be able to restrain herself when she sensed Chin use current thoughts. She would risk ruining her image to teach him a lesson. Seriously, she had lived for so many years, but she had never seen such an arrogant person. Chapter 1247. Of course, it wasn't possible for the peach garden to only be filled with peach trees. In truth, the area was extremely large, and there were many grand buildings. However, starting from the yardmaster, the few people with real status in the peach blossom garden all liked to live in small courtyards. On the other hand, those who lived in the majestic palaces of the peach garden were those who lived on the periphery of the peach garden. Of course, although they were people on the periphery, it wasn't easy for them to enter the peach garden and settle down here. As mentioned before, the servants responsible for the trivial matters of the peach garden could cause the outside world to fight over them. If one didn't have a certain background and strength, they simply weren't qualified. Chin Yu is currently walking through a great hall of the peach garden. The servants that came and went respectfully bowed. The words Mr. Ninth filled with awe. Mr. Ninth was the lowest ranked disciple, but he was still a mister. In the peach garden, his status was only inferior to the garden master and several exalted. Moreover, everyone knew that Miss Peach Girl was about to marry, and that Mr. Ninth was even more honored than before. He was regarded as the future ruler of the peach garden. Disregarding status, just at the East Seas longevity banquet, Mr. Ninth had slaughtered the Saint Shishan Leonie. Just this matter was enough to exclaim in admiration. Mr. Ninth, the ancient texts you are looking for are on this bookshelf. The cultivator leading the way was a woman. Perhaps because she was accompanied by all sorts of ancient texts all year round, she had a scholarly air about her. Her eyebrows were soft and clear, making her look very comfortable. She glanced at Chin Yu and lowered her head. I will wait outside. If Mr. Ninth needs help, please call me at any time. She bowed and left. Chin Yu wasn't in the mood to look at this girl. Even on the way here, this girl's eyes revealed some warmth that tickled his heart. His divine sense swept over the bookshelf. Soon, he discovered something. Chin Yu reached out, and a thick book fell into his hand. He flipped through it. A moment later, he closed the book. After a moment of thought, he put it back and took out a second book, and so on and so forth. After reading through 7 or 8 books, Chin Yu finally had a clear understanding of the true divinity Tao. Along the way, he also found some information about the self-concentration divine seal. Then, he felt that he should burn some incense. To successfully condense the self-concentration divine seal on his first try and not kill himself, he really was lucky. Things of the past were already in the past, so there was no need to think about them and scare himself. Chin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed these thoughts. He couldn't help but frown. God Realm, Original God Realm, Sacred Path, Sovereign Realm. This was a general and rough division of realms. It also had many details. For example, after the peak of Original God Realm, there were 3 realms: Hopeful Sea Realm, Sea Observing Realm, and Sea Observing Realm. Of course, it wasn't detailed here. In short, this was the most orthodox cultivation path in the eyes of vast young cultivators. There were traces that could be followed. The road ahead had already been walked by countless seniors, so it was certain that it could indeed be walked. But if there was light in the world, there would also be darkness. If there was a righteous path, then there would naturally be some unorthodox paths. For example, condensing the divine seal in an attempt to obtain a brighter and more resplendent future. Some lunatics who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, or were full of confidence in themselves, proposed the slogan, "My fate is in my own hands, not in the hands of the heavens," and the clamor finally dissipated. The inheritance of the divine condensation seal was severed because its success rate was too low, and the price it had to pay was too high, to the point of losing one's life. The true God path was another side path. Previously, it was mentioned that cultivators had their own limits, and those who could break through to the immortal realm were few and far between. Most of them would never be able to reach it in their entire lives. But what about after breaking through to the immortal realm? It was even more difficult to reach the original God realm. Not even 1 out of 100 true gods could have such a chance. The great path was severed, and there was no way to advance. Some people accepted their fate and abandoned all restraints, living a free and unfettered life. But some people didn't accept it. Not only did they not accept it, but they also tried to change their fate. Thus, they created the true God realm. The so-called true God meant the true God path, which was used to distinguish the realms of the God path. Later on, as time went by, the cultivators who had entered this path had increased in number. Their numbers had increased, and they had also established another cultivation system. They thought that all living beings in this world who had cultivated to the God realm had reached the threshold of life transformation. In other words, they were qualified to pursue immortality. The difference was that the power they controlled was too little, and their bodies weren't strong enough. As long as they could comprehend enough rules of heaven and earth and fuse them into the divine seal, they could become stronger and stronger. When the number of rules they fused with reached a certain limit, they would have a qualitative change. Unfortunately, this cultivation system had suffered a destructive blow. Fusing with the rules of heaven and earth continuously could make them stronger. Even the true God realm cultivators at the God realm could have the power that could rival or even defeat the original God realm experts. But the mentioned qualitative change had never been discovered. Not just that, but obtaining an incomparably formidable strength at the divine Tao realm also brought with it massive hidden dangers. As they comprehended more and more rules and their strength rose, the true God realm powerhouses found it difficult to control. Countless of them blew themselves up. The stronger they were and the higher their talent was, the harder it was to avoid blowing themselves up. In the end, this caused the strongest powerhouses of the true God path to perish one after another. The remaining weak ones were panic-stricken and didn't dare to continue fusing with the rules of heaven and earth. But as time passed, an even crueler matter was slowly confirmed. Perhaps it was because the existence of the true God path itself went against the will of the world. Even though these cultivators were strong, they didn't obtain a lifespan that could compare to their strength. In fact, they were far inferior to ordinary divine Tao cultivators. In the end, they could only wither away and collapse, filled with despair and unwillingness, turning into dirt. It was because of this that the true God path gradually fell into desolation, becoming a cultivation path that only a few people knew about. Chinyu rubbed his temples. Although he could see everything clearly, he still felt that something wasn't right. But there was one thing that couldn't be wrong. The future of the true God path was uncertain, and most of them had short lives. Chinyu hadn't experienced the baptism of tens of thousands of years, so he wasn't too sensitive to this aspect. And more importantly, he had unknowingly stepped into the true God path. Unless he destroyed his own divine seal, this was a path that he couldn't turn back from. He could only grit his teeth and brace himself to the end. Destroying his own divine seal, forget it. Unless Chinyu was prepared to risk a 99% chance of crippling himself, he wouldn't choose this path. The Yar Master had also said that the righteous path had walked for so many years, but no one had succeeded in filling the vacancy of the ruler's position. Perhaps there might be other lucky chances in the true God path. Forget it. Chinyu rubbed his face and turned to leave. The scholarly female cultivator bowed. "Take care, Mr. Ninth." Chinyu glanced at her. In truth, she was indeed a woman who made one feel comfortable looking at her, whether it was in appearance or temperament. But because he felt comfortable looking at her, he only glanced at her. Chinyu didn't ask for her name, nor did he pause in his steps. He nodded and left. Now, all he could think about was how the yard master was going to arrange for his cultivation. Since he had become a member of the Peach Garden's 4.5 people squad, Chinyu wouldn't be aloof or arrogant. He wouldn't rely on his own ability to break through to the ruler realm. That wasn't called strength of character or integrity. It can only be called stupidity. He couldn't do such a stupid thing. not even if he was beaten to death. Qin Yu couldn't do something like not having a backer, so he was really looking forward to it. He hoped that the Yardmaster could help him pave a bright path. Even if this idea was too extravagant and unrealistic, it could at least help him point out a bright path. With the guidance of the old turtle, Qin Yu had long since experienced the importance of a good teacher in cultivating the light and darkness integration. After returning to his residence, Qin Yu asked the old turtle for advice on cultivation while waiting patiently. But what came first wasn't the Yardmaster summoning him again, but Lei Xiaoyu, who came to say goodbye. "Big brother Qin, I'm going out with eldest senior brother to do something." She hesitated and said, "During this time, no matter what you hear, it's best not to get involved. Focus on recuperating." Qin Yu's eyes flashed. His eyes flickered. "What are you going to do?" Lei Xiaoyu shook her head. "I can't tell you. Anyway, just listen to me." She was obviously afraid that Qin Yu would continue asking. She got up in a hurry. "Big brother Qin, I have to go back and prepare." She turned and left. The azure dragon on her shoulder turned his head and glared at Qin Yu proudly. It was probably saying, "I'm going to do something that you don't even know." This fellow was quite vengeful. It was such a small matter back then, but now it wanted to get back at him. Qin Yu smiled. Since eldest senior brother was going, Lei Xiaoyu's safety should be no problem. But he didn't know what it was that eldest senior brother, who had been in seclusion, had to come out personally. On the third day after eldest senior brother left the peach garden with Lei Xiaoyu, Qin Yu finally received the Yardmaster summon. It was different this time. He was sitting and resting a moment ago, but in the blink of an eye, he was already in front of the Yardmaster. TSK, TSK. She was indeed a true saint. Her superb spatial techniques were far superior to Qin Yu's. But why did he feel that the Yardmaster was deliberately showing off? It couldn't be. She was a true saint of the Permitha continent. How could she do such a thing? Ahem. The Yardmaster didn't give Qin Yu much time to think. She coughed lightly and went straight to the point. After going to the Hall of Ancient Records, you should have a good understanding of the true divinity path, right? Qin Yu cupped his hands together. Yes, I have investigated. As he spoke, he revealed a trace of hesitation. But I don't know why, but I feel that something is wrong. The Yardmaster frowned. What's wrong? Qin Yu said honestly, "Isn't it said that those who can comprehend the 9 laws of heaven and earth before attaining the divine path have excellent aptitude? But the records I saw of the cultivators who cultivated the true divinity path didn't seem to be like that." He had already thought of what he felt was wrong in the past few days. He looked at the Yardmaster and waited for her explanation. As an old fellow who had lived through 3 cycles of divine path samsara, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she was a living fossil. She definitely knew the key points. The Yardmaster grunted. "This matter is actually very simple. Someone was afraid of losing face, so he deliberately passed down the ancient records in such a way as to cover up the truth of the past." She glanced at Qin Yu. This boy was really meticulous. After knowing that she had stepped onto the true divinity path, he was still able to detect this. Clearly, he wasn't easy to fool. From another perspective, he was confident that he wouldn't be trapped by the true divinity path. Although it was good for Qin Yu to be more confident now, the Yardmaster still felt a little uncomfortable looking at him like this. Humph! It seemed that the sudden use of space transfer to pull him over just now didn't shock this boy too much. The true divinity path was first discovered by a junior cultivator of a large sect with amazing aptitude. It was a newly discovered great Tao of cultivation that rapidly increased one's strength. There might even be an extremely distant and unknown future. Therefore, at the very beginning, many people regarded the true divinity path as the true great Tao of cultivation. It was a test to distinguish geniuses from mediocrity. After all, it was extremely difficult to completely comprehend and control more than 10 laws of heaven and earth before reaching the divine path. In that era, the various holy lands of the vast Yang world. Of course, they were different from the current holy lands. In short, they were a group of old fellows who tacitly approved of their disciples stepping onto the true divinity path. They tried to find the possibility of taking a step further from them. But you already know the result. The true divinity path was not easy to walk. Of all the cultivators who stepped onto it, the most outstanding ones self-destructed one after another. The rest all died of depression and their lives were ruined. You should know that those who were able to step onto the true divinity path were all absolute geniuses. They were even the most dazzling existences of that era. But it was because they were too outstanding that they ruined themselves on the true divinity path. Instead, it was the remaining cultivators who weren't so outstanding who survived the great waves. Some even crossed the sea of bitterness and became true saints. That old dragon in the East Sea succeeded in this way. Otherwise, with his aptitude, he wouldn't have been able to reach where he is today. The last sentence was filled with the contempt of a top student towards a bad student. Chapter 1248. But even if he was a scum in the past, he had now become the dragon sage of the East Sea. Chinyu didn't dare to say anything, so he pretended not to hear. After hearing the garden master's explanation, Chinyu understood. Destroying the most outstanding geniuses of an entire era, causing countless brilliant stars that should have been able to shine with a tyrannical pressure to perish. This was certainly a scandal. In particular, everyone was involved in this scandal. For the sake of face or to maintain one's dignity, joining hands to suppress the truth was certainly the best choice. That was why there were so many records in the ancient books. As for being full of loopholes, did anyone care? History was like this. It was up to them to believe it or not. After all, the so-called ancient books could only be passed down by those with strength and a powerful background. The truth of history lies in what these people want you to see. Dark, really dark. At this moment, Chinyu sighed again. He thought that if he didn't do well in the future, the Peach Garden's Mr. Ninth, who had killed his saint twice, might be famous for a while. But in the future, no one would know him at all. As the saying goes, a man leaves his name behind, and a goose leaves its sound behind. After living in this life, if he couldn't leave a trace in the world, it would be too tragic. Otherwise, he should set a small goal for himself, so that he could at least be listed in the ancient books in the future. After all, the realm of ruler was easy to say, but it was too far away. It was so far away that Chinyu still didn't know how to achieve it. After saying a bunch of nonsense, the yardmaster also gave Chinyu an obscure lesson. Without strength and status, he might become a passerby recorded in history. After all, he was a true divine and had the right to write history. Furthermore, even if he was no longer around, no one would have the guts to delete his name. At most, they would just slander him and smear his name a little. But he would definitely be engraved in the records of the vast young world, becoming a part that couldn't be ignored. As for Chinyu, this boy was really smart. Obviously, he understood something. He had strength, means, talent, luck, and he was smart enough. The yardmaster told herself to stay calm, but this boy was right in front of her. If she couldn't grasp him tightly, she wouldn't feel at ease. Have you seen the female official in charge of the Hall of Ancient Records? Chinyu didn't know what this question meant, so he nodded honestly. The yardmaster said, "If you marry Peach Girl, I'll make the decision to give her to you. If you're to drink water now, Chinyu would definitely spit it out." He thought to himself, "You're a true divine. Is it really okay for you to say such things?" But the yardmaster's expression was calm, and her eyes were sharp and penetrating. Obviously, she was not joking. How would Chinyu answer? He had no choice but to pretend that he didn't hear it. The yardmaster furrowed her brows and sneered inwardly. "I don't believe that you can persist like this." There wasn't much time, but that was only for an old man who had lived through 3 cycles of the divine Tao. In fact, he knew very well that there would be plenty of opportunities in the future. He would just have to wait and see. You are destined to belong to the Peach Garden. Don't even think about escaping. The yardmaster took a deep breath and calmed herself down. She said calmly, "The cultivation of the true God path is different from the orthodox path. You already know what happened to those people back then. Have you figured out the reason? Qin Yu respectfully bowed. I ask honorable master to teach me. The divine path is, after all, the divine path. It's like a bottle with a limited capacity. How can it contain the rivers and the seas? The true God path takes the path of overturning the rivers and the seas. Both sides are diametrically opposed, and the outcome is determined. The yard master's voice was calm. Therefore, this path can be said to be extremely difficult, but it can also be said to be simple. As long as the bottle can be forged to be large and strong enough to contain the rivers and the seas, it will definitely trigger an unprecedented qualitative change. At this point, the yard master let out a light breath. Therefore, the cultivation system of the true God path is not necessarily wrong. It's just that it's very difficult for someone to truly walk to the end. Forget it. She looked at Qin Yu with calm eyes. You've already embarked on this path. Unless you stop cultivating from now on and wait for time to pass until you wither, you can only desperately become stronger. The stronger you are, the more rules of heaven and earth you can accommodate. Otherwise, your outcome will be no different from those people back then. With a bang, you'll explode. Of course, your explosion might be even louder. The corner of Qin Yu's mouth twitched. He thought to himself, if you're not the yard master, you'll easily get beaten up for talking like this. Do you know that? But he was the yard master, so Qin Yu could only endure it. Not only did he have to endure it, but he also had to bow respectfully. Thank you for your advice, honorable master. Looking at the yard master, he had an expectant look on his face. In this world, there was no such thing as stopping after discussing a problem with someone. Since the dignified, true saint had found the crux of the problem, of course, he had to provide a further solution. For example, how to forge the bottle bigger and stronger. The yard master finally felt balanced. Ever since she saw Qin Yu's divine seal, the anger that had been stuck in her chest had mostly dissipated. No matter how arrogant you are, no matter how much you jump around, don't you still need my guidance? Understand the status of a true saint. After a slight pause, the yard master said indifferently with a saintly expression, Today, I summoned you here because there's a lucky chance that has coincidentally arrived. I want you to take a share of it. If everything goes smoothly, you won't have to worry about your body exploding for a period of time. Qin Yu glanced at the yard master out of the corner of his eye. At this moment, his brows had relaxed. His mind raced for a while, and he seemed to have understood something. Immediately, he bowed and said in an even more respectful tone, Disciple respectfully listens. The yard master coughed lightly. When the vast young world was first formed, tens of thousands of races coexisted and fought for supremacy over the world. In the midst of cruel killings, they fought for the survival space of their races. At that time, the vast young world didn't have a ruler, nor did it have a divine path. In reality, the rulers were powerful life forms that were born at the beginning of the world's formation. They were the true darlings of the world. They were born with formidable strength. That was true strength. I've experienced a few of them before. The top existences among them were comparable to today's rulers. However, their success was due to the vast young, and their failure was also due to the vast young. These life forms were too strong, and influenced by their natural instincts, they were cruel and bloodthirsty. Gradually, they affected the continuation of the tens of thousands of races, and in the end, they were eliminated by the river of time. The yardmaster paused and continued. As the cycle of existence approached its end, these ancient and powerful life forms should have carried out a struggle. None of them were willing to accept the fate of being eliminated and swept into the abyss. At the same time, they made another preparation to deal with the unpredictable outcome. Facts have proven that the struggle of these ancient life forms should have failed. In fact, this is very normal. No one can contend with the world. This is their conclusion, and also a reminder for you. Qin Yu, no matter where you go in the future, you must firmly remember that you must be in awe of the world. Seeing Qin Yu solemnly nod, the yardmaster raised a hand and rapped the table. The story is over. Now, let's officially enter the main topic. The lucky chance that I mentioned to you just now is another preparation that these ancient life forms have made. We call this the Lost Garden. It is like a world that has been forgotten by time. It preserves the environment of the ancient world when it was first formed. It is the final effort of these ancient life forms for the continuation of their bloodline. Perhaps they had already anticipated that the decline would be inevitable, so they built the Lost Garden. Your eldest senior apprentice brother, third senior apprentice brother, and eighth senior apprentice sister have already left with the Azure Dragon. In order to prevent you from entering the Lost Garden, I have already made other arrangements. Qin Yu carefully asked, "Isn't this disciple going with my senior apprentice brothers and sisters?" Lei Xiaoyu didn't need to mention it. Eldest senior apprentice brother and third senior apprentice brother were both fierce people, especially eldest senior apprentice brother. It will be much safer to follow him. The corner of the yardmaster's eye twitched. She added another label to Qin Yu. Besides the previous ones, he was also thick-skinned enough, flexible, and not inflexible at all. If he could find a backer, he would find one. Most of these people lived for a long time. This could be considered a good thing. This time, only your eldest senior apprentice brother knows that you will also enter the Lost Garden. Unless it is absolutely necessary, don't expose it. This time, it is best to keep a low profile. Take what you need and leave. Do you understand what I mean? Qin Yu nodded vigorously. There was nothing he could do. There were too many potential enemies, and there were countless people who wanted to kill him. In addition, there was also the extremely terrifying West Mountain Scholartree Sage. Moreover, there were some things that the Yardmaster didn't say too bluntly. Qin Yu had already guessed them. Sending his eldest senior apprentice brother to the Lost Garden was enough to show how dangerous it was. From this, it could be seen that the other influences that had the qualifications to know the existence of the Lost Garden had also sent their top characters. If Qin Yu were to clash with them, it would be difficult for him to conceal himself. Once he exposed too much, gathering light and darkness, space-time into one, it was enough to drive many people crazy. Even his status as the son-in-law of the Peach Blossom Garden might not be able to suppress them. This would be detrimental to his future peaceful life. Only by listening to the old would he not suffer a loss. He had to keep a low profile and quietly enter the village. Seeing Qin Yu's solemn expression, as if he had really heard her words, the garden master nodded inwardly. She tossed him a jade slip and said, "This contains some information about the Lost Garden as well as my arrangements for you. Be careful not to blow it up the moment you leave." After he caught it, the yardmaster flicked her sleeves. Qin Yu's vision blurred. He thought that the yardmaster was trying to show off her skills again. Was it so hard to accept being suppressed by her own disciple? Shua. Qin Yu's vision recovered. What appeared in front of him was a transmission gate. It wasn't quite the same as Peach Maiden's. It looked a bit shabby, and the woven peachwood branches seemed much smaller and more tender. Sure enough, she only had one daughter. This difference in treatment, TSK, the yardmaster really didn't want to hide anything at all. Qin Yu's divine sense entered the jade slip. After a moment, he took it back. After making sure that he had memorized all the contents, he exerted a bit of force with his fingers. With a light crack, the jade slip shattered and his appearance changed. Qin Yu stretched his limbs and stepped into the transmission gate. The following transmission process was far worse. It wasn't as safe and comfortable as when he was by Peach Maiden's side. After swaying for a while, light suddenly bloomed. Qin Yu subconsciously squinted and raised his hand to block it. An indifferent voice sounded in his ears. "Tell your ancestors that the favor they owed me in the past will be written off." As the eldest disciple of Dragon Mountain's half-sage, it had been many years since Cliff Ping had suffered such a loss. The Lost Garden was about to open. Because his sect had found a pangolin beast, they also had the qualifications to enter. It was just that the bloodline of the pangolin beast wasn't too strong and the number of people it could bring was limited. Dragon Mountain's half-sage took out 2 more as a favor, leaving only 3 spots for the Holy Land. Although he was the eldest disciple of a half-sage and was usually trusted, Cliff Ping had always acted appropriately. Although his master often scolded him for giving birth to a good-for-nothing, he still doted on his only son. Of the 3 spots, one had to be given to Long Foam. This was something that Dragon Mountain's half-sage wouldn't allow. Cliff Ping had knelt on the ground and begged for it. The second spot was, of course, Cliff Ping himself. As the strongest person below the Saint Realm, this was a matter of course. He took it calmly. After all, the Lost Garden was filled with dangers. In a situation where the Saint Path couldn't intervene, he could provide the greatest guarantee of safety. The final spot was given to a junior apprentice sister. Although this junior apprentice sister hadn't been in the sect for long, this cold and aloof junior apprentice sister was actually as gentle as water to Cliff Ping in private. After another round of lovemaking, Cliff Ping couldn't bear the pleas of the naked junior apprentice sister in his arms and agreed. Everything had been decided, but who would have thought that Dragon Mountain's half-sage would suddenly interfere and take away the 3rd spot that was given to his junior apprentice sister? Cliff Ping's anger soared to the heavens, but he didn't dare to say a single word. After spending a great deal of effort, he still wasn't able to make his junior apprentice sister happy. After suffering a heavy kick, the two of them had completely broken up. He didn't dare to act out against a saint, not even the son of a saint. Then everything would fall on this boy who had appeared out of nowhere. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.